DA, Chapter 1. A Hero Falls. A figure slowly walks across a desolate and cold ground, the tormented screams of the damned echoing over the hills. The atmosphere is dark as shadows seem to crawl and hug him, caressing him as he nears his destination, and a destiny greater than any could have known. His posture is tall and proud even as his heart beats a sad song, his features hidden under a thick cloak. Betrayal, one of the worst feelings any could experience. He'd sacrificed so much for them all, to end with nothing. His life had been ripped apart at the tender age of 12. Every year had been one hellride after another, each time his sanity and hope coming dangerously close to a cracking point. He'd faced the worst of monsters, bared the curses of his enemies and allies alike, and still carried on, but no longer, not for them. He gave a tired sigh as he looked at the rocky ceiling over him, wondering what they were doing now. Had they realized he was gone? Would they look for him in worry? He snorted at the thought, knowing exactly what would happen. They'll definitely search for me, sure. After all, can't have their greatest weapon suddenly pulling a Houdini on them, but they'll be too late. He almost smiled at the thought, but in the end his lips remained a flat line. He should have felt crushed. His fatal flaw should have rendered him immobile and tearing his mind apart, and yet none happened. In the end there was just a sad acceptance. As if he'd always known that this betrayal would come, and now, rather than kneel over and wait for death, he pushed forward. He knew it would be difficult, but he needed to do this. So he continued on, his destination already in sight, but as he walked, he couldn't help but think back to just yesterday, and the goodbyes. No. Not goodbyes but, see you later. 24 hours prior. He looked around his cabin for the last time. His bed off to the side, the sheets in neat condition, and most of his pictures left on the wall right above his bed. The spring his father left him as a gift trickled almost sadly, as if knowing that the sole occupant of this cabin was leaving for good. He sighed sadly as he shouldered his pack and walked outside, the night sky and moon greeting him. He glanced up at the satellite and couldn't keep the grimace from appearing on his face. This only made him sadder. He was loved to gaze up at the moon, especially while walking along the beach. The cool breeze of the sea would calm him as the gentle glow of the moon would cast a gentle light, but not anymore. The sea was now an unwelcomed abode, hiding lies and deceit like the very king that ruled it. The moon's light was now cold and scathing, as proud and unforgiving as the girl who hunted under that very light. Why did it have to be this way? He asked himself sadly as he walked to the amphitheater, knowing that one he couldn't leave without telling was there. It didn't take him long to spot her, tending her flame as she slouched over, the fire burning low and almost blue to reflect her mood. Seeing her looking so down brought something more to him than sadness. It was rage. He wanted to skin alive anyone who would dare to so much as harm a hair on her head, and who knows, maybe he'll get that particular pleasure later on. Still, for now he approached her, letting his footfalls alert her to his presence, but she didn't really turn to look at him. He knew why. She was probably buried in guilt and sadness, but he wouldn't let her keep that burden. He sat beside her, their shoulders brushing against each other since she was in a 16-year-old form. Her light brown dress snuggily displayed her figure yet kept her modest, her hair falling loosely over one shoulder. He waited for her to look at him, but she remained adamant on not looking. He sighed as he slowly reached over and cupped her chin before gently tilting her face towards him. If anyone had seen him, they would have thought that he was suicidal. Who in their right mind would dare lay their hands on a goddess, an Olympian goddess at that, without their spoken consent? Maybe he was a little crazy, but then again, it was that crazy that saved his bacon half the time in war. So, he didn't hesitate to make her look at him, and what he saw made him sadder if possible. Her normally glowing, orange eyes were dim and red-rimmed them, letting him know that she had been crying. Even now a tear or two fell down her smooth cheeks. He sighed as he used his free hand to wipe away the tears before focusing on her eyes, after subtly checking one of her cheeks and looking for any purple marks. Good, it healed already or wasn't that bad, he thought in relief before speaking, knowing that this news would devastate her, but it needed to be done. I'm leaving. She opened her mouth to speak, alarm and concern filling her eyes, but he placed a finger over her lips to stop her. I know, all of it. Her eyes widened at his words, but he continued. I know what's going to happen and I need to leave now, but that doesn't mean I'll be gone forever, he said softly. But, she started as she searched his eyes for something. They'll kill you, if you try to run. If they can catch me, he replied with a familiar smirk on his face. But they don't know where I'm going, and wouldn't dare to follow if they did. Where are you? I can't tell you, Tia. he interrupted, using the pet name that only he knew and no one else would dare use. He saw the hurt in her eyes but continued on. I know you wouldn't betray be like them, he spat out the last word as if it was sour, but you not knowing will keep you out of harm's way, but believe me, I will come back, someday. He stood up as he finished, knowing that if anyone could convince him to stay, it would be her. However, as he turned and prepared to walk away, her felt a warm pair of arms wrap around him in a gentle hug from behind, before an orange glow covered his body. His eyes widened as he immediately knew what she did. Why? He asked in a near whisper, not expecting this action in the slightest. Because, she whispered back, her voice slightly muffled from his shirt, you've done so much for me, how could I not do this for you? He chuckled slightly at her reasoning, though a little thought at the back of his mind said there was more than wishing him simple protection or paying a favor. He didn't probe further though and turned in her arms to hug her back firmly, taking in the scent of a warm campfire and something that could only be described as home. He relished in it but knew that he needed to get going soon so he begrudgingly released the hug. He almost laughed at the pout the goddess sent his way, but nearly had a heart attack with what she did next. She leaned closer and placed a chaste kiss on his cheek, making his eyes widen to the size of dinner plates. His thoughts stopped as he just stared at her, finding her sudden blush adorable. Then, with one last smile she left in a burst of flames. He couldn't really move for a good 5 minutes but when he did, he sighed as he ran a hand through his unruly hair. Goddesses, I will never figure them out, he thought as he turned and walked through the silent camp. He glanced at some of the cabins but didn't really feel any attachment to them, not anymore. He didn't give any second glances as he arrived at the hill, Talia's pine standing tall with Peleus wrapped comfortably around the trunk. He smiled at the sight before he glanced at the shadows near him. He watched as the shadows condensed until it formed an enormous body of packed muscle, black fur, and glowing red eyes. Mrs. O'Leary, his hellhound. He smiled fondly at her before he climbed onto her back and pointed her back at the shadows. The massive dog understood easily as she bounded at the shadows before jumping in as she dissolved along with her passenger. And as they left, he didn't so much as glance back at the place he once called home. Back to present. He sighed again as he left those memories. It wasn't time to dwell on them. He already missed many of them though, the ones that did him no wrong. His cousins, Tia, his mother, and a spare few others, but he would see them again, in time. With that thought he stopped as he arrived to his destination. Before him lay a pit that dropped into the worst abyss. A place of horror and madness that even the gods fear, but there wasn't a trace of it in his glowing green eyes with what looked like glowing flames dancing around them. I guess this is it, he mused as he inspected his own hand for a moment before speaking in a strong and clear voice. I, Perseus Theseus Jackson, hereby revoke all ties to Poseidon, god of the seas. Thunder crackled even though they were underground. He felt his body slump for a moment as a decent amount of strength left him, but his resolve remained strong. His once sea-green eyes seemed to dull for a moment before they took on an almost hazel, earthly shade with the flames growing stronger within them. His pitch-black hair turned to a deep brown as his frame glowed in a mix of earthen green and fiery orange before fading. Looks like they mix well, he muttered before looking at the pit. I really am out of my mind. With that cheerful thought he jumped, and plummeted to the darkness awaiting him. If you want to support me or just to read ahead of the public release, you can join my Patreon. Patreon Moonhorse. 0 comments 0 vote. DA. Chapter 2. The beginning of the end. As he plummeted through the darkness his thoughts were eerily calm. His face was rather blank, without a trace of fear even though he knew the horrors that awaited him, but he was ready. Until then, he was mostly bored while waiting to arrive. Was the fall this long last time? He wondered before he thought back to why he had made this decision. Oh yeah, it all started with her. Tartarus, before the house of Hades. Fear. That was all he could feel as he blindly walked forward. His girlfriend's limp body slung over his shoulders as he heard the distant screaming of monsters looking for blood. He couldn't stop, regardless of how much his muscles screamed in protest. He could feel every injury he'd obtained in this damned place suddenly burning altogether, as if trying to weigh him down so he could be caught. But he trudged on, knowing that if he stopped, he'd be forever kept in the house of night. However, his train of thought was stopped when a shockingly soft voice spoke. Perseus, wait. It wasn't the request that made him stop as if frozen. It was the sheer surprise of the voice he recognized yet didn't at the same time. It was Nyx, the primordial goddess of night, and she was speaking to him as if she stood just a bit to his side. How in? But I thought she was caught with all her kids going berserk throwing around darkness. His thoughts screamed as dread built up within him. He knew there was no way he could escape now. She could kill him and Annabeth with a flick of her wrist and there was nothing he could do to trick her again. So, he waited, a part of him hoping that death would be quick, but that wasn't what happened. Perseus, I need you to open your eyes and look at me. What? He nearly shouted as he turned to face the voice, still keeping his eyes firmly shut. I can't, I'll be driven insane if I look at anything in your home, he said evenly, not wanting to possibly anger the goddess any more than he probably already had. Not right now, she replied calmly, I've hidden the horrors but there are things I need to show you. How do I know you aren't tricking me? He asked, unable to keep a bit of bite out of tone. He heard her sigh before she spoke again. I, Nyx, primordial of night, hereby swear on the Styx and my own immortality to tell you the truth from here onwards and allow safe passage out of my home. With her words thunderstruck but Percy could tell that this oath was beyond anything he'd heard before. Down to his bones he could tell it was absolutely binding. With her oath complete, he found himself hesitantly opening his eyes to look at her, and the sight made him gasp. Before she had stood before him and Annabeth is a monstrous construct of darkness, shadows churning around her as her form towered over them, easily bigger than any of the giants. Now though, standing before him was probably one of, if not the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Pale, flawless skin, lusciously raven hair cascading to her hips, hourglass figure dressed in an elegant black dress that screamed sensuality yet didn't come off as slutty whatsoever. And her eyes. Like two pools of darkness, drawing in the light with glowing white pupils looking straight at him. He had to catch his breath as she gave him a faint smile. A warm and kind smile that could compare with the likes of Hestia but her eyes seemed to hold a sadness in them as she looked at him. He wondered why she looked so sad but then felt a weight leaving his shoulders. He looked in alarm as Annabeth floated in what looked like a pool of darkness, suspended above him. Don't worry, she said before he could even shout, that is just to make sure she doesn't wake up while we talk. He calmed down at her words, knowing she could only be honest with him. He looked to her and nodded, waiting to hear her out. She smiled faintly in appreciation before she began, her soft voice soothing him like the cool embrace of a gently night after a long day. First of all, Perseus, I need you to understand something. We primordial gods live by a very different set of rules than other divine beings like titans, giants, and gods. For one, the fates cannot control us since we are too powerful. What? He asked in shock but she merely nodded. Yes. Only a primordial of fate can but, Anike isn't with us anymore, Nyx said sadly. However, that isn't the main reason I stopped you for. The reason I am here now is to show you something, and give you a choice. What are you showing me? He asked suspiciously as his eyes narrowed. Gods don't just come out of the blue to fill someone in on things without some kind of favor, and a favor to a primordial is a biggie. The original text of the ancient laws, she replied seriously, her eyes boring into his. Why? He asked, his guard still up. Because, the Olympians have gone too far for too long and the madness of my sister and her children is only making things worse, Nyx answered. The world is spiraling out of control and one day there will be a war to end all wars if someone doesn't stop it, and there is only one way to do it, she trailed off with a whisper. How? He asked nervously. She didn't answer but instead waved her hand, and from right beside her an ancient stone tablet appeared written in a language Percy couldn't even begin to comprehend. Yet he looked on down until the last law came to his focus and somehow, without being able to read it, he understood what it meant. It was as if something so old it lay forgotten by all except the most ancient beings, and now he knew it. What is that? He asked, his mouth suddenly too dry. That, Perseus, is the law of succession, Nyx answered gravely as she looked at him. And it is something Gaia purposely hid and none of her children or descendants know, save for you. Why show me it? He asked as he felt as if the sky was on his shoulders again. Because, I wish for you to be the first to use this law, Nyx answered, before her gaze softened, and I believe you are the most worthy to do it. I know you won't abuse this power and, you've almost conquered your fatal flaw. Conquered? Percy scoffed, looking at her as if she'd grown a second head. I still fight for Olympus even though I know half the time they just toss me in and wait around before delivering the final blow after I put in all the work. I turned down immortality and the easy out just for love. And that same love which I so happened to learn recently, cheated on me while I was missing. And yet, I'm still dragging her ass with me through this hellhole rather than abandoning her. He screamed in rage as pent-up emotions finally burst out after weeks of inner turmoil. You already knew. Nyx asked in surprise as she glanced at the suspended spawn of Athena, then why did this all for her? Why even allow yourself to fall into Tartarus? Percy sighed as he shook his head. I don't know, I guess, I was hoping that she'd come clean after all this. That maybe it could be salvaged and the wars would end, I just want some peace. By now some tears were slowly trailing down his cheeks, but to his surprise, a petite hand gently wiped them away. He looked up in surprise to see Nyx with the same sad eyes, her voice almost trembling as she spoke, and this is why I know you are worthy. Even after knowing that they're using you, even after your love broke your heart and continues to hide it, you haven't abandoned them, but at the same time you are growing past it. I can see it. Your loyalty has been tempered for years now through hardship and betrayals. You don't give it easily anymore, and with moving past petty thoughts of revenge or breaking down, you continue on. Keep that loyalty, but know when to give it to those that deserve it. Nyx then stepped back as she looked at him sternly. Go on now. You have doors to release and a renegade primordial to defeat, and now you know how to do it. Percy nodded as he wiped the last of his tears before he looked at the floating girl beside him. I'll keep her like that until you get to the doors. Don't worry, once you get them free I'll teleport her to your side and she'll think she helped you along the way, Nyx said with a tiny smirk on her face. Thank you, he replied as he started to move past her, his gaze set on the doorway at the end of the dark passage. Oh, and Percy, Nyx called after him, making him pause as he glanced back to meet her mesmerizing eyes, think about what really keeps you fighting. Who and what truly holds your loyalty that makes it all worth it, and should anything happen, keep your emotions in check. Do not let them control you as they do, since it won't help anyone. And lastly, should you make the choice, you know where to find me. With that she was suddenly gone along with Annabeth in a flash of shadows, leaving him alone to complete his journey. So he turned and started to walk away, ready to face the hordes of monsters that no doubt waited for him, until he suddenly stopped. Wait, did she call me Percy? D.A. Chapter 3. The beginning of the end 2. His eyes snapped open as he durst out of memory lane, instead gaze focused on the nearing light at the end of the pit. Here it comes, he thought as he passed through the opening to see the massive expanse of Tartarus below him. It was just like he remembered. Burnt grounds that looked like it was littered with glass. Poisonous atmosphere that started to irritate his lungs, and more screams of pain and terror than the fields of punishment could ever cause. Lovely, he thought as he glanced straight below him and wondered how was it he was going to land exactly. I wonder if this will work, he mused as the ground rapidly approached him. He focused for a moment before he shot his right hand forward, a green glow around it along with a familiar tug along his gut. After a few seconds the ground below him burst up into a tall spire with a gravelly slide to one side. He smirked as he landed along the smooth side and slid the whole way to the floor. Once he landed he brushed off some dirt before looking around. Now which way was it? He muttered before noticing that the shadows seemed darker in a certain direction. He smiled at the trail as he started to walk, keeping his senses sharp in case any monster decided that they wanted a piece of him. As he walked it seemed memory lane wanted to talk to him again, his thoughts falling back to that battle, the battle where things truly changed. Sweat and blood matted his hair. His lungs burned and his arms ached, but he kept attacking. Riptide sang through the wind as it sliced through rock debris on its way to his intended target, Gaia. The battle had been furious up till this point. One moment they were fighting in Athens, wearing down the giants until the Olympians finally arrived to fight, more like stroke their own egos with how hopeless the demigods would have been without them. Hell, he pretty much saved Artemis from being turned into a shish kebab, and all he gets for his troubles is a glare and, don't touch me boy. Well damn for being polite in the middle of a fucking battle and offering her a hand to get up after he dealt the finishing blow on Gratian. Whatever, that set the tempo and soon all of the giants were down again, but then, and only after their part was up, did the Olympians tell them how their home was under attack with monsters and Gaia at the head. Only then to get smacked by Zeus back home. He remembered Leo's call over the winds just before it happened. Clench up for the mother of all bitch slaps. He would have laughed his ass off if they hadn't been in a life and death race against time. That only lead to the Argo 2 unceremoniously falling apart on landing and tossing them all out into the thick of it. Thank Nyx they managed to organize and were starting to push the monsters back, but that lead to where he was now. Fighting alone against Mother Earth while his friends tried to push through a sea of monsters. He wasn't daunted though. No, in fact he almost felt elated. This would be his chance to take Gaia down for good. No reforming, no siring of new threats, no more insanity from her. He focused on Gaia's smiling form, her literal whirlwind of dirt and rock surrounding her as a shield. He kept swinging, sometimes managing to nick her from time to time, but the earth always managed to heal her, just like when he fought his half-brother in the labyrinth. He glanced around himself and noted that they were actually close to the beach as he steadily retreated while feigning to being overwhelmed. That's right, come to me, he thought. He dodged a spear of earth, getting narrowly grazed along the hip, making him grimace, but he kept his focus on Gia. She smirked at the sight of his blood, licking her lips as if already tasting victory. He growled at her arrogance as he redoubled his hacking and slashing as he took another step back. Giving up, demigod? Asked Gia with glee as she eagerly followed him while waving her arm and sending another barrage of dirt at him. He rolled to the side to avoid it but couldn't get out of way when a pillar of stone suddenly shot up and nailed him in the chest. He sailed back a decent distance, his entire chest screaming in pain as he bit his lip to suppress a scream. Definitely a few broken ribs, or all of them, he thought as he forced one eye open to look at Gia as she looked down at him with a grin. You're finished, demigod, I've won, she said in her gravelly voice as her green eyes glowed ominously. And why is that? He asked back as he kept panting. Don't you see? She asked while opening her arms in a grand gesture to the skies around them, your precious Olympians abandoned you in fear of me. Your forces are divided and dwindling, and you're on your last legs. Face it, I win. Yeah, one problem, he replied while forcing himself up to one knee while gingerly touching his chest. And what would that be? Gia asked with a raised eyebrow. I'm on home turf, he replied as he glanced at the water lapping at his feet. Gia followed his gaze before her eyes widened in realization, but before she could travel back and away from the water, Percy attacked. With a wave of his hands, a torrent of water obeyed his will and grabbed Gia before dragging her into the surf, and he chased after her. He soon spotted her thrashing as hard as she could, but the water was unforgiving as it battered her. In that confusion he attacked, riptide slicing through the tide before digging into her shoulder as she tried to scream in pain, but the water kept her silent. Ichor started to stain the seas, but Percy didn't care as he willed an air bubble to form around them. Then, on a sheer instinct that he couldn't even recall having, her exhaled as the water at his feet froze. Soon the ice spread until they were surrounded in a dome of it, cutting them off from the outside. As Gia laid panting on one end, Percy glanced around in wonder before he noticed that there seemed to be tendrils of darkness within the ice. I've blocked their sight, fates and gods alike. Hurry! He heard Nyx's voice in his head. He couldn't help but smirk as he nodded before turning an icy glare onto the goddess regaining her footing. Their eyes locked, and for the first time Percy could see genuine fear in her eyes, both knowing that neither would get out until one was dead, and Percy was the one with the sword. How? She asked in a shaky tone as she glanced at the ice, her breath becoming visible in the cold. I've never heard of Poseidon controlling ice. I tend to mix things up, he replied before his eyes narrowed as he approached her. Gia. She looked at him uneasily as he stalked forward like a wolf that just caught its prey and was moving in for the kill. By the ancient laws set by chaos, I, Perseus Theseus Jackson, hereby challenge you to a duel for right of protogonoi status and all domains held in your title. A thunder strike signaled the pact. The death match was on, or more like one-sided massacre. Gaia's eyes widened in horror as she paled, her entire frame shaking as she took a step back. How? She asked in a whisper. I hid those texts, the only way any could have known. No, someone betrayed me. She screamed in a rage. She was never on your side, Percy murmured darkly before he raised Riptide, now say goodbye. He didn't give her a chance to answer as he surged forward. She backpedaled in alarm but wasn't quick enough to dodge as he stabbed her straight through the gut. She screamed as ichor poured out of the wound, but Percy wasn't anywhere near done, not by a long shot. He pulled out Riptide before smashing the flat of the blade against the side of her head, making her fall back with a pained whimper. He looked down at her without a shred of sympathy before raising Riptide. He swung down as Gia feebly tried to guard, but all that did was allow for Riptide to cleave through her arm, severing it as she screamed even louder than before. She was crying by this point, and yet Percy could only look on with a cold glint in his eyes. He reached down before tugging her head up by her hair to make her look at him as he pressed the tip of Riptide against her left breast, right over her heart. This is for every life that you've ruined, Percy practically growled as he glared at her. I should make you suffer for centuries to even make up for a fraction of what you've done, but it looks like you got a little lucky in the end. Gia looked at him with almost blank eyes, a sign of her resignation. She knew in a straight-up fight she wasn't any better than an average demigod. After all, no one had ever had enough power to force her to fight directly, and her siblings were beyond her courage to challenge. Now she was fully isolated and about to die. They'll betray you, in the end, she coughed out with a mix of ichor. Percy gave her a pained smile. One devoid of any joy or warmth. I know, he whispered as he drove riptide through her heart, ending her miserable existence. She coughed once before sighing as her body went limp, eyes going dull just before she started to turn to dust. But this wasn't any regular gold dust. It was an ashen white, like the pale remains of a once great fire. As the dust blew away in an apparently imaginary wind, a green glow encompassed Percy along with a surge of power unlike anything he'd ever felt before. He could suddenly feel the shift of the earth, the tremble of the land as creatures and machines of all types traveled the surface. For a moment he was the earth and almost felt like he could do anything. He could level all civilization with a thought, raise mountains with a flick of the wrist, and cause earthquakes the likes of which no beings alive could comprehend. Then, it all vanished, but not completely. He could still feel the earth near him and the hum of vibrations. He also felt stronger than he had before the fight even while exhausted. So this is the power of a primordial, he thought before another mind invaded his. Not yet. You're still mortal or more like a demi-primordial for now. If you want full access to it you need to complete the law of succession, but you haven't made that choice yet, came Nyx's voice. There's still too much to think about for now, he replied while shaking his head. The power felt great, but still, if he could take the chance for a life of peace, then so be it. Nyx had given him a tool for power, but he'd never been one for it anyways. If he had to make a choice, then now wasn't the time to do it. So, with a sigh, he willed the ice to release him. In a few moments he was back in the water and propelled himself to shore. As he walked on the beach he could see remains of the monster army routing with demigods on their tails. Just a little more and we're home free, he whispered as he readied his sword and charged, for now forgetting about the primordial he just made fade. He was shaken out of his memories as he stumbled on a small rock outcropping. Catching himself he glanced around only to notice he was at a familiar cliff overlooking an endless expanse of darkness. Okay, that was a lot quicker than I thought it would be, he mused as he looked around. There were no other monsters or darkness gods this time. Just him standing at a gloomy cliff. He was about to call out but stopped with a musical giggle of sorts reached his ears. In front of him, suspended right over the chasm of darkness, was Nyx. She had a hand over her mouth as she tried and failed to suppress. He gave her an annoyed look which seemed to make her laugh more, but she soon got it under control. Having a good time? He asked with a quirked eyebrow. Sorry, it's just that your face was funny when you almost fell, she replied with a renewed giggle. Glad to see I'm so entertaining, he muttered before he fixed her with a serious look. She caught onto it and straightened her features as she looked at him. Have you made a decision? She asked in a calm voice that vibrated with power as her dark eyes fixed him to the spot. I have, he replied as his fists clenched. They're monsters, and someone needs to put a stop to them. And are you sure you can do it? She asked as she walked on thin air towards him. You'll have to fight and possibly kill those you once called ally. The old bonds you once cherished will have to be severed. They've already severed them, he answered as his eyes glowed, the irises literally burning in mixes of orange and hazel. And those that are still precious to me, I'll save them. They deserve better and I will do anything for them. Nyx looked at him silently for some time, as if peering into his soul to search for any doubts or hesitation. Finding none, she nodded before speaking again. Very well, Perseus, but to do that then you must do something for me. What would you have me do, milady? He asked, noting how she almost smiled at his word choice. I want you to become our successor. D.A. Chapter 4, et 2. I.A.N. To make sure it is clear, the story is so there might be some changed details about what happened in the two wars. I'll explain it through exposition if there was so no one gets confused. Just two details that are changed so far. 1. Tartarus didn't manifest and face Percy when he escaped. Percy did meet Danmason, I can't remember how to spell his name, Ares Bane, but he didn't come to Percy's rescue. Bob did come down but had to leave Percy and Annabeth alone before the House of Night. 2. Rather than a month or so, the time between the Second Titan War and Percy's abduction was nearly 1 year, so all characters or older won't matter much since they'll get older with time skips anyways. That's all I can think of that's relevant for now. Now, onward to the story. equals 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 equals. They stood before the council, haggard and sore. The great seven looked on towards the gods surrounding them, each preening with pride and overflowing ego. Percy listened on as Zeus continued on his long speech about their great victory in this war and how it would be remembered for ages. Percy wanted to scoff at his uncle and walk out of there, but he kept a blank facade for now. Soon Zeus finally finished and got on to the big rewards. And so, the council has decided to gift each of you with immortality and possibly godhood, Zeus said, the last words looking rather difficult for him since it meant more than just his son would get the honor. Do you accept? He asked in a booming voice. Yes, came one immediate reply, making several heads turn in surprise to look at the speaker. Annabeth looked ready to pop with excitement, completely ignoring her battered leg as she grinned with her reply. The sight made what little affection remaining for her crumble, his eyes dulling as he mentally shook his head. It looks like even after everything I do, I still wasn't good enough, he thought dejectedly as some of his friends gave him nervous glances. He returned a small smile to ease them on it, but inside the world was going cold as one of his last reasons to fight for happiness left him without a second thought. Strike one. He even glanced around the throne room and noted that Athena looked pleased with her daughter's choice along with Apollo surprisingly. That made Percy frown as he wondered why was that, but he tucked it away for now. Well, Zeus questioned with his famous impatience, looking at the rest of the heroes. Jason cleared his throat in response before stepping forward, but not without taking Piper's hand in his own. Father, though I would be honored to accept godhood, I must decline in favor of a change to my reward, he said, earning shocked looks from most of the Olympians aside from Aphrodite as she looked on with approval. And what would that be, my son? Asked Zeus in a stern though not hostile tone. Well, Jason started as he glanced at Piper, who nodded back while giving his hand a squeeze. Rather than full immortality, I wish for Piper and I to gain partial immortality and be placed as guardians of New Rome. Zeus seemed to mull it over for a minute, occasionally glancing at other council members, before he nodded as swiped his hand at the pair of demigods. They both glowed, their respective color matching their parents before it faded, and the pair stepped back with a slight bow, warm smiles on their faces. And the rest? Hera asked, since Zeus seemed to be buried in his thoughts at the moment while eyeing his son. Frank and Hazel followed suit, their requests being similar but with the addition of having their curses removed, allowing both to control their lives, which would hopefully be happy from now on. Next came Leo, and he accepted becoming a god to work with his father, though Percy felt there was another purpose to his decision, but he could ask later. And lastly they all looked to Percy as he stepped forward, noting how his father looked at him with pride. It made him smile, but he knew that smile wouldn't last once his request was finished. Perseus Jackson, Zeus boomed as thunder crackled above, making every god roll their eyes. The council has seen fit to not only offer you godhood but to make you the 13th Olympian. Do you accept? The councilors leaned forward in anticipation, his friends looking on in awe, and Percy even noted the calculating gleam in Annabeth's eyes, but he sighed as he shook his head. With all due respect, Lord Zeus, I must decline, he answered, much to the gasps of those in attendance. Instead, I would rather exchange my gift for a few requests. At his words he could see the anger flash in several sets of eyes, namely Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, and Athena, which made him curious as to why. Shouldn't she be happy, since it would mean it would be impossible for Percy and Annabeth to maintain their farce of a relationship? Are you saying that you refuse such a generous offer? That being an Olympian isn't good enough? Athena practically hissed. Now I see why her flaw is pride, he thought, even as he didn't back down from any of the looks. Seeing as no one else was going to speak, he continued on with his request. My requests are simple and well within your power, he said evenly as he looked straight at Zeus. And what would they be? Zeus asked with barely restrained anger in his eyes. One is that Hestia and Hades are reinstated as Olympians. They are the two eldest and deserve to be on the council, he replied. Zeus reddened a little before he nodded curtly and snapped his fingers. Two thrones immediately shot up out of the marble floors, one at each end of the male and female side. One seemed to be made of living flames with the design of a hearth at the backrest. The second was made of a dark obsidian with carved skulls and faint wails of agony drifting along the surface. Before Percy could continue on with his second request, he was suddenly tackled into a hug by an 8-year-old goddess who was continually thanking him. He chuckled as he returned a brief hug before they separated. Just seeing Hestia's glowing smile made him feel as if all was right with the world, her flaming eyes dancing with joy. She then walked to her new throne, ascending to full godly height before sitting comfortably. Percy glanced at Hades' throne to see him materialize in it out of shadows. He gave Percy one firm nod with a faint smile, a miracle in the case of Hades, before Percy turned to address Zeus again. For my second and final request, I ask that all peaceful titans such as Leto and Calypso be set free, he asked. Silence reigned for a time as some of the Olympians looked at each other before Zeus looked at him and nodded. With that, the meeting finished and the heroes were dismissed but informed of the party that would commence in a few short hours to celebrate them, but Percy didn't really feel like celebrating. Percy walked along the roads of Olympus, not really heading anywhere in particular. It had been a week since the battle and strangely, his father had requested him to remain in the immortal city for the week to discuss some things with him. He wasn't sure what it was about but he couldn't shake a slowly growing feeling of dread building in his gut. Throughout the week Hestia had kept him company, helping him finally deal with the emotions left after what Annabeth did and how he found out. He's walked in on a private conversation between Piper and Jason while they were waiting for Annabeth to find the mark of Athena. He'd eavesdropped by accident and caught the fatal words. I saw her once coming from the woods with her clothes messed up and limping funny, Piper said in a whisper. You don't think. Jason didn't finish the sentence. I don't think, I know, she replied in a sad tone. And it was always when she'd get most stressed about wanting to find Percy. Then we should tell him, Jason said firmly. It's not our place, Jason. Annabeth has to come clean about this, she replied. But Percy had left before they could continue, his heart slowly cracking as he made it to his room, crying himself to sleep while he could only ask one thing, why? Even after all had happened he kept the appearance of a happy and silly boyfriend for the trip and quest, knowing that he needed to focus for now or else the world would be doomed. Luckily Hestia's kindness and warmth helped him and he regularly stayed at her palace rather than his father's. But, as the week went by, he noticed how whenever he happened by an Olympian, they would give him an odd glance before walking off and Hestia seemed nervous whenever around him. He even caught the traces of regret in her eyes but for what, he wasn't sure. He broke out of his thoughts as he noticed that he'd walked all the way to the throne room by accident but the doors were oddly closed, piquing his curiosity. If you like the story so far, please throw some power stones. Chapter 5. At 2. Luckily Hestia's kindness and warmth helped him and he regularly stayed at her palace rather than his father's. But, as the week went by, he noticed how whenever he happened by an Olympian, they would give him an odd glance before walking off and Hestia seemed nervous whenever around him. He even caught the traces of regret in her eyes but for what, he wasn't sure. He broke out of his thoughts as he noticed that he'd walked all the way to the throne room by accident but the doors were oddly closed, piquing his curiosity. He glanced around to see if anyone was looking before he walked to the side of the building, out of any possibly prying eyes. Throughout the week he'd lightly tested some of his new abilities and learned some tricks. With his palm firmly pressed against the side of the building he could feel every inch of the marble and stone. He could place where exactly each throne was and even how the occupants were sitting or fidgeting in them. He focused more with his mind until an image appeared and he suddenly found himself watching the throne room from above, every word and gesture not escaping his notice. He noted that Artemis was oddly absent and Hestia was arguing with her brothers, save Hades who looked furious about something but remained silent. He listened in as his curiosity was piqued even more. You can't seriously be considering this. Hestia shouted at Poseidon who only waved her off dismissively. That upstart has dared to reject our offer again and humiliated us, something must be done. Zeus boomed as he glared at his older sister. But it was his choice, Hestia countered while glaring back with steam literally coming off her. Why can't you accept that he wishes to live a mortal life? Mortal, Athena spat with disgust, and why would anyone wish to remain in such a state? For his family. Hestia shouted back. He wishes to remain for Sally, Paul, and his baby sister. He wishes to remain because he can protect the demigods that fought beside him for years rather than become a god and be forced to watch them all die. Poseidon scoffed before fixing his sister with a glare, that won't be an issue for long. What do you mean? Hestia asked suspiciously before she suddenly went pale as she grabbed her armrest. At the same time Hades shot up, his own features turning to shock and then horror. He seemed to pale more if possible before looking at Poseidon and Zeus. What have you done? He asked in a whisper as the entire room seemed to grow colder. Removing a foolish reason for my son to remain mortal, Poseidon answered soberly. Why you killed them, Hestia whispered as the hearth seemed to slowly shrink in on itself. Not me, Poseidon answered before a silver flash happened. Then Artemis appeared with some mortal blood on her hands and a cruel glint in her eyes and a faint smile on her lips. It is done, uncle, Artemis said just before Hades roared in rage. How dare you kill Sally and Paul Blophus? His anger was palpable enough to make every Olympian, save Hestia, shiver, but even that didn't compare to the rage Percy was feeling as he listened to this. Strike 2. The room started to shake, making the Olympians look around in alarm. Percy was starting to see red, wanting nothing more than to gut Artemis and his father, but then a familiar presence appeared in his mind. Percy. Control your emotions, don't let yourself be enslaved to them. I know you're angry, but you can't do anything now. Please control it. I know you can. Came Nyx's voice, cutting through the clutter of his murderous thoughts. As he settled, something snapped. His anger, once a tempest of burning rage, cooled until all he felt was a numb cold in him. His anger turned into a frozen hatred. He would see these monsters beg like the animals they are. He would rip apart everything they hold dear, and one day, when they were literally pleading to fade, only then would he kill them. So with that thought, he settled and continued to watch as the room stopped shaking. The Olympians remained weary but soon returned to their discussion, some glancing at Poseidon to see if he had anything to do with it, but he looked just as confused. Their attention returned to a seething Hades, but the god of the underworld simply turned around before muttering, I will not be part of this, and with that, left in a burst of shadow. Hestia was silently sobbing, looking at her family in disgust, but Zeus ignored it as he looked at Artemis. So is it properly done? He asked, to which she nodded firmly with her smile growing for a moment. Yes, she answered, I've almost forgotten what it felt like to properly castrate a boy, though I do regret not turning him into a jackalope and feeding him to my wolves. Oh, and don't worry, Phoebe and I made sure it looked like a monster attack. But what about Sally? Hestia asked in a whisper. Artemis shrugged dismissively, though she did fail to meet Hestia's gaze. Not a maiden, none of my concern. At least I got a new baby girl to train into a proper huntress in the future. But that's Percy's sister. Hestia shouted as she found her strength. How can you kill his family and then just take the last piece of it? He's a boy, why should I care? Artemis asked while looking back at her aunt in anger. Besides, it's not like he'll ever know. But he saved you. Twice. And this is how you repay him. Hestia screamed as the other Olympians remained silent while watching. I will never owe anything to a damned boy, Artemis growled as her frame glowed silver and her grip on her arm rest tightened to the point of making it crack. But this is WR. Smack. Everyone stood still, in shock as they looked at the scene. Poseidon stood before Hestia, his hand still outstretched after having slapped Hestia. She looked at him with betrayal and pain in her eyes, a sizable mark already forming on her cheek. Why? She asked in trembling whisper. How could you let them kill Sally? To hurt your own son like this? That mortal stopped being my concern the moment she spread her legs for another man, Poseidon growled as he looked at his silently crying sister. And I will not have her be the reason I lose my favored son. He shouted before he returned back to his throne before adding, and honestly I would have preferred the child gone too, but I can accept Artemis taking her as long as she makes sure he never finds out. Strike 3. Hestia looked around the council, looking for any support, but she found none. Most agreed, their pride hurt after Percy's refusal, and the few who didn't agree remained silent, such as Demeter and Aphrodite. With a final sob, Hestia turned before disappearing in a burst of fire, the hearth in the throne room falling barely above the coals burning in it. Percy watched this all unfold, his hatred for the Olympians growing with every second. He silently watched as Poseidon returned to his throne. Percy was about to leave but caught the last words before his connection to the throne room broke. We'll inform him of his parents' demise tomorrow before offering immortality again, and if he doesn't accept, death will be the answer. Percy's eyes snapped open as he looked at the marble wall before him. He glanced down to see ice had formed along his feet and where his hand had touched the wall. His hatred loomed within him, his heart beating sadly as he stepped back from the wall. He needed to leave now. He knew it, otherwise he could snap and no one that gets in his way would be spared. So he turned around, not glancing back at the grand throne room as he walked towards the path leading to the elevator. He wasn't coming back anytime soon, and once he did, this city would be ash. DA. Chapter 6. At 2. 3. Percy opened his eyes again only to meet a pair of pitch-black swirls looking back at him. Nyx sat before him, watching him intently as he tried to focus on his internal powers, only to go down memory lane again. Percy, Nyx nearly whined as she huffed at him, focus. We've been at this for a year now. I know, Percy sighed as he straightened his back and focused on the space between his palms. So far a year had passed since he'd jumped into Tartarus, or about 2.5 months in the upper world since time passes 5 times faster down here. In that time Nyx had explained to him her goal and why she needed him to achieve the law of succession. As it turned out, the law had 2 ways to pan out. Either through a primordial willingly naming an heir or through conquest which allowed him to permanently defeat Gia though she wasn't completely gone yet. For lack of better terms she is in a state of limbo and will only truly fade once her heir claims her domain but Percy had decided that he didn't want it. With Nyx's help he'd removed the core of Gaia's power from himself and now she stored it away, telling him that it was his right to choose who would inherit the power and domains. Once he'd disconnected from it Nyx dropped a bomb on him that he didn't expect, granted when she said, our successor, he should have seen it coming. Nyx wanted him to inherit her domains along with those of Erebus, her late husband. She had his core, and by channeling it, she'd given Percy the full blessing of Erebus along with her own. In response to the blessings, Percy's appearance had changed again to match the new power. His irises had become midnight black like Nyx but actually looked like a swirl of flaming darkness sucking in the light while his pupils glowed a beautiful, icy blue. With it his hair mirrored Nyx's and his tan became lighter though still noticeably darker than Nyx. Aside from his changes he'd gained an incredible control of shadows and darkness itself that could attack and snuff out any source of light or heat. He noted that any shadows he controlled became significantly colder and when shadow traveling, he left a trail of frost on the entrance and exit. But now, Nyx wanted to see him mastering the darkness and to do that, he needed to generate pure darkness rather than control a shadow. So, for the last 3 months, he'd been training. Every morning he would battle hordes of monsters with a variety of swords. Claymores, sabers, machetes, katana, and any other blade design he could think of, all for the goal of making him a master of swords. Then he would rest for a few hours only to fight monsters again but this time solely with his powers and fists, which lead to fascinating discoveries such as forming shadow claws capable of slicing through even some of the toughest monsters. He occasionally used Hestia's blessings as well, usually in the form of Greek fire to bombard particularly stubborn monsters. It got to the point monsters now had to be threatened to even dare face him. Still, the last segment of his schedule, meditating while trying to form the pure essence of his powers, was showing little to no results. Sure, his control and stamina when using his powers was only getting better but he still couldn't generate darkness and it was frustrating him. His brow was already trickling with sweat as he glared at the empty space between his palms. Focus, Nyx said softly as she gazed at his palms as well. This isn't working, he ground out as his hands nearly trembled from strain. He kept at it for several minutes before releasing a defeat sigh as he dropped his hands on his lap while Nyx frowned. This doesn't make sense, she muttered as she looked at him. Your control is nothing short of making you a prodigy but you can't manifest your element. I don't know, he replied as he gazed at his hands, it's like, my power is pulling in different directions and trying not to mix. Nyx quirked an eyebrow at him while motioning with her hand for him to go on. Maybe, let me try something different, he said with narrowing eyes as he looked at his hands. He then separated them, pointing both palms up as he focused on channeling his power. This time he simply called on it but didn't try to control it, simply letting it flow as it wished through him. He closed his eyes as he felt the atmosphere cool around him, the sound of frost forming below him. He remained like that for several minutes until he heard Nyx gasp making his eyes snap open to see his palms, and it left him dumbstruck. In his right palm floated an orb of fire, a black fire with small streaks of icy blue that gave no heat. In fact, Percy was sure that the fire was burning at temperatures well below zero in either degree type. Then, in his left palm floated a crystal that seemed to be formed out of shadow with similar icy blue streaks in it. Both seemed to suck in light and warmth. Incredible, Nyx whispered as she gingerly reached for the fire and slowly poked a finger into it. However, she frowned when her finger was in the flame but there was no reaction or anything happening to her. She then looked at him before saying, Percy, try to hurt me. What? He asked, taken aback by her sudden request. Think about hurting me, she said as she gestured to her finger still in the fire. But, just do it, she snapped. He sighed as he nodded before thinking of the flames harming her. Barely a second later she gasped in pain as she pulled her finger back and looked at it. Her index finger looked like it had frostbite but in the pattern of a burn with her pale skin turning a sickly mix of icy blue and black. She brought her other hand up and tried to focus her godly energy into the finger to heal it, but nothing happened. She frowned as she focused more of her power to the point her entire frame radiated shadows. Slowly her skin regained its pale tone to the point it didn't look frostbitten but the scaring remained. I can't believe it, she sighed as she wiped off some sweat while looking at his confused expression. You managed to create the polar opposite of Tartarus' most deadly invention. And that would be? He asked with a quirked eyebrow. Hellfire, she answered gravely, making his eyes widen. He'd never had the displeasure of experiencing it himself but he'd seen the results on some monsters. Anything burned by hellfire permanently keeps the burn marks, even after reforming and feels the ghost pains for eternity unless healed by Tartarus himself. The burns are incredibly hard to heal to the point even the Phlegethon cannot fully heal its burns in one sitting. But now, he'd created the opposite. A fire that was so cold it burned and left the victim frostbitten. He even noticed that Nyx grimaced as she twitched the finger. But how did I make it? He asked as he looked at the flames in his palm again, and wondering if these flames had a similar curse to them. He'd need to figure out how to remove the curse if it did. My guess, Nyx started as she studied his fire, is that the blessings and lineages in you each left aspects to fuse with your new power. Seeing his confused face she rolled her eyes before continuing. It seems Hestia's fire and your rare trait of ice control from Poseidon mixed with the darkness to form this, void fire. And, much like Hestia, your flames will not harm those you consider family or precious unless you willingly do it. She then pointed to the crystal in his other palm. And that is what's left of Gaia's power in you. Not only did you become partially immortal the moment you defeated her but you also gained a rare trait from her, the control of natural crystals. I'm guessing that the crystal has a similar affect to the void fire of yours. Wow, he said in awe as he looked at the manifestations of his power making Nyx giggle. Well, this has been an eventful evening but your luck ran out, she said ominously. He looked at her as a cold shiver ran down his spine. Odd, he couldn't remember the last time the cold bothered him. Now we can train with this new power and by the looks of it, I might have to pull one of my favors with Tartarus, she finished as lightning cracked behind her making her eyes glow maliciously. Where the hell did the lightning come from? He thought as he did the only thing a true man could do in this dire situation, he whimpered for mercy. D.A. Chapter 7. Reclaiming Family I. 5 years later 25 in Tartarus. The clash of blades rang through the air as the combatants danced back and forth in a deserted field. It was 2-1 and neither side was backing down. The lone one was a man, dressed in nothing more than black leather pants and 2 blades in his hands. One was a beautiful obsidian black blade forged into a katana reaching 3 feet with a glowing blue line along the center of the blade. It was guardless and had a dark blue, metal and wrapped leather handle with the engraving Purgatory in ancient Greek near the base. The second one was an equally dark blade designed like the famous Viking swords, the Ulfberht, a double-edged sword of 3 feet with a near-imperceptible taper leading to a short but fine point. Along the blade, the engraving Sin was also written in ancient Greek. Both blades had been forged with a fusion of abyss crystals and Tartarian steel to make them basically indestructible. They were smelted with hellfire and cooled with void fire, the first and only such blades of their existence. 2 blades that manifested his deadliest abilities and could only be wielded by those he allowed. Swords that could cut down even the mightiest of immortals as easily as a harvester cuts his field. Both his opponents were aware of the lethality of his weapons and both maneuvered with skills mastered through millennia to avoid so much as a nick from either blade. One opponent was an immense man, easily towering both others at 9 feet in height, his entire body hidden under a heavy cloak but even then you could see his bulging muscle underneath. He swung a massive greatsword with ease and grace, the speed of which made the blade look like a black blur. His fellow fighter was obviously a woman of petite build wielding what looked like a foot-long knife attached to the end of a slick chain. Both attacked together seamlessly, an endless barrage of slashes and stabs but their opponent handled the onslaught with unparalleled skill, his 2 swords meeting every strike. The katana in his right deflected every attempt of the woman, at times nearly cutting her but she always managed to evade at the last moment. At the same time his Ulfberht in his left blocked or deflected the greatsword. It would have seemed odd at the sight in how one man, a fraction of the size of the one wielding the greatsword, could match him in strength with no noticeable trouble while also moving faster than the woman as she moved around him. They kept fighting, their movement beyond the ability of any mortal or lesser immortals to even perceive, let alone matching. Soon the single man seemed to falter in his steps and the woman made her move. She tossed her knife with deadly precision towards the man's head while the larger man made a grand overhead swing to cut the man down the center. Too late, both noticed the man's smirk as he tossed Purgatory into the air before his free hand grabbed the chain as his head tilted to the side, allowing the knife to sail past harmlessly. With a sharp tug, the woman was hauled towards him while also raising Sin towards the oncoming greatsword. He raised his Ulfbert and used it to catch the massive greatsword, the sheer force of which made the ground beneath him crater with only a slight bend of his knees. Then he flicked the sword to the side while turning on his heel, his sword brought up until the point tapped against the chest of the larger man. At the same time, the woman fell at his feet and turned on her back, only to see Purgatory fall into his waiting palm before the blade was immediately at her throat, daring her to move. Damn, she muttered as the larger man scoffed. Cheap trick, he grumbled in a dark and old voice. You taught me well, was the smaller man's cheeky reply. The three stood silent for another few seconds before all three started to chuckle as they pulled back with their weapons at their sides. Now it was possible to get a proper look at the man. He stood at 6'4", with a body sculpted by angels, or fallen angels considering their location. His body didn't have an ounce of fat and his steely yet lean muscles coiled just beneath the surface with the body of a perfect gymnast. Flexible and light yet undeniably strong and resilient, a body meant for the perfect warrior. Even after years of seeing him like this, the woman couldn't help but blush. It made her wonder if taking a vow of chastity after her late husband was worth it, but in the end her resolve remained strong. The man's wild hair was pitch black, but the very tips had an icy blue color, giving him a classic bad boy air. His eyes were mesmerizing with literally black, flaming irises and glowing, icy blue pupils. He had a lightly tanned, chiseled face of a 25-year-old at his prime. This man could make Adonis switch teams with his looks and get Hera to have an affair if he wanted, the apex of the male form. This man is Percy Jackson and his opponents are none other than Nyx, primordial of night, and Tartarus, primordial of the pit. Well, Percy, I think you're ready, Nyx said as she made her knife and chain disappear into shadows. Really? Percy asked excitedly as his swords turned into matching rings on his index fingers. Yep, Nyx said before looking at her older brother. Don't you think? HMPH, might as well, Tartarus, the ever-cold, snorted. Nyx rolled her eyes at her brother's antics but knew on the inside he was proud. They'd trained Percy together, after Percy had successfully become the champion of Tartarus, arena in the deepest recesses in the pit, and prepared him to lead the next generation. His fighting ability was second to none, themselves included, and with the domains he would inherit it was doubtless that he would be more powerful than Tartarus had ever been, and he'd been Chaos, eldest child. But Percy had still kept his kind heart, making him immensely loyal to those that earn it and protective of anyone he cares about. So Percy, Nyx said as she nearly giggled at his massive grin. Go on, complete the next step. Percy nodded as he took a deep breath before speaking in a voice laced with power. I, Perseus Theseus Jackson, state my claim and right to be heir of Nyx, primordial of night, and Erebus, primordial of darkness and shadows. With his words completed he glowed a magnificent mix of icy blue and pitch black, an eruption of power flowed off him making Nyx shudder. Definitely going to be the strongest, she thought as the power settled down allowing her to get a better look at her heir. He looked the same but was now wearing a long coat actually made of darkness with the hood pulled back and a muscle shirt, also formed from darkness that was practically a second skin. The trims were icy blue and the very air around him misted over with frost, his eyes glowing with power. The process is almost complete, Nyx thought as Percy seemed to study himself. There was one step left, for him to actually claim her domain as his, but for now he had a partial link to his claimed domains and she needed to train him in their connection. Once his training was complete, he would need to fully claim his domain, which would lead to her finally fading and joining her husband in the realm of the fated. Though, he has an extra 2 steps, she thought with a slight frown. DA. Chapter 8. Reclaiming Family 2. The process is almost complete, Nyx thought as Percy seemed to study himself. There was one step left, for him to actually claim her domain as his, but for now he had a partial link to his claimed domains and she needed to train him in their connection. Once his training was complete, he would need to fully claim his domain, which would lead to her finally fading and joining her husband in the realm of the fated. Though, he has an extra 2 steps, she thought with a slight frown. No new primordial could truly be born without the will of a council or king, and right now the throne was empty. Another task is that Anike's heir needs to be chosen to give the full titles of each new primordial since the fates could not control them. Until then, no new primordial could obtain full control of all their domains, leaving them limited like the Olympians and their dependence on Western civilization. As of now, Percy is roughly 75% primordial, and his true power will come when he claims his domains and his titles by Anake's heir. But for now that was more than enough, and power-wise Percy was an easy match for several Olympians or a major titan such as Kronos at full strength. Great, Nyx said after noting that Percy finished inspecting himself. By the way, try and see if you have a sacred animal. Most protogonoi don't, but then again, there's never been a primordial that started out as a demigod. In truth, Nyx and Tartarus were basically shooting in the dark with Percy and the generation that would follow. How strong could they grow? What would happen to Earth and the other planets left by chaos with differing gods and pantheons? It was all a mystery, and Nyx couldn't help but be excited for it, since she would always have a sense of her domain even after passing into the realm of the fated, so she would know how it goes. Percy looked at her and Tartarus with a quirked eyebrow for a moment before shrugging and closing his eyes. Nyx felt his power spike as his frame glowed in mixes of black and light blue before suddenly his form started to shift as darkness wrapped around him. He fell to his hands and knees before his body started to change. His coat of darkness turned into fur, his nose and jaws elongated into a snout, and a tail grew out of his back, and then he started to grow. Nyx's eyes widened as she watched Percy grow to nearly 3 meters in height at the shoulders before the darkness dissipated to reveal an absolutely gorgeous wolf. His fur was like a perfect night, black and smooth. His body was lean and collided with powerful muscle, his eyes still the same black flames with icy blue pupils, and some of his fur had light blue streaks. Wow, Nyx murmured as Percy inspected himself while sitting in a typical dog fashion before looking at her. He tilted his head to the side while one of his ears twitched, making Nyx have to suppress the most girly squeal and desire to pet him. It seemed Percy caught on as he actually keened while giving her perfect puppy dog eyes. Her dam broke as she practically tackled him, burying her face in his surprisingly warm fur. She quickly stood on her toes and hugged his large neck while cooing, loving the sensation of his fur as it passed through her fingers. She caught Tartarus chuckling but didn't care as she got her fix before finally stepping back. Percy gave her a wolf grin, gleaming white fangs and all, before he shifted back to his human form, still grinning at her. So, wolves huh? Can't say I'm disappointed at all, he said. It will actually make things easier, Tartarus commented, making both Percy and Nyx look at him questioningly. You were going to infiltrate the hunt, right? Ah, not really. Percy asked sheepishly. I was thinking more along the lines of, hi and die, before taking back my sister. But she's been with the hunt for 5 years. Sure, that means she's about 6 or 7, but you don't know what kind of lies the hunt has been feeding her. You'll need to gain her trust before taking her away from them, otherwise you might end up with your little sister hating you, Tartarus explained. You mean that filthy band of sexist murderers has to live for longer? Nyx asked with disgust evident in her voice. She'd watched them for a long time, seen how Artemis spread her own hate and misery into innocent girls who'd been hurt once by men. Sure, a good deal of men were nothing but pigs waiting for slaughter, but festering and cultivating that hate into emotionally fragile teens and children did nothing for them and only harmed others in the end. Just how many wives had Artemis left as widows? Sons and daughters without fathers or next of kin, all because they happened to cross Artemis' path without having done anything wrong. Brothers, younger and older, abandoned by their sisters regardless of how much they need them. The D'Angelo siblings were a prime example of that. Percy growled in agreement, showing that with his animal's awakening he'd grown a set of fangs that remained in either form. Tartarus didn't even look fazed though as he continued on. Look, your form is perfect for infiltrating the camp as a wolf. Your sister is young, so she shouldn't even have a companion yet. That will be your perfect chance to get close to her, bond, and slowly show her the truth. Then, when she is ready, bring her here and do with the hunt what you will. But they'll be suspicious if a huge, pitch-black wolf suddenly shows up out of the blue and gets too close to her too soon. Not to mention you can feel the power coming off him that already comes close to a minor god when suppressed, Nyx interjected. They'll ask too many questions and watch him closely. It'll be better if he just skins them alive. But what of his cousin? Tartarus asked with his red eyes glowing under his hood intently. Okay, what was going on? Since when did Tartarus advise against violence and death? What about her? Percy asked with a frown. Well, you know Artemis and Phoebe were there, but how do you know that Talia was involved? She may be innocent and could be spared or even brought to your side, Tartarus answered, making Percy slowly nod as he thought on it. Great, Nyx sighed in frustration, so how exactly can he infiltrate them? Tartarus chuckled before he glanced to Percy. Why not ask her to go with you? At the mention of her, Percy blushed slightly while rubbing his neck. Nyx smirked at the reaction, knowing what was going on in his mind. They'd been friends for 20 years down here after Nyx freed her from her imprisonment. Not that the Olympians would know, considering Zeus is the only one that knew the location of her prison and completely forgot about her centuries ago, which also meant she wasn't freed with Percy's request. The pair hit it off immediately and became the closest of friends. Percy would help her train in combat and she would teach him all sorts of history and other mundane things she enjoyed doing. It certainly made Percy a better cook, that was for sure. However, after a decade they started to get closer to the point everyone could see their chemistry except the pair in question, that and Percy had budding feelings for another. Problem was, he definitely liked both, and with how similar they are, it would make sense that he'd be confused about it. I'm not so sure, I mean. Before he could finish there was a flash beside the trio and they all looked to see their arrival. Speak of the devil, Nyx thought while suppressing a giggle as Percy blushed more at the girl in question. She stood at a 5'10", making her rather tall by girl standards. Dark brown hair spilling over her shoulders with goldish hazel eyes with flecks of green, filled with warmth. Her skin was a coppery tone, flawless complexion, and a figure to die for, dressed in a snug black and green dress that reached her knees. Before them stood Rhea, titaness of fertility, motherhood, and mountain wilds, and now, primordial heiress of the earth thanks to Percy. Also the mother of Percy's other crush, making it hilariously awkward in Nyx's opinion. Oh, I can't wait to see where this love triangle goes, she thought as Rhea greeted Percy with her heart-melting smile that got another blush out of him as he looked away with a hasty reply. Of course that led to Rhea trying to see his face, innocently wondering why he was so red. Nyx watched the pair do their familiar back and forth for a few minutes before she cleared her throat to get their attention. Okay then, now that everyone's here, or at least those relevant at the moment, Nyx muttered the last bit while thinking about some of her other siblings doing who knows what. So Rhea, Percy needs your help for a mission. What is it? Rhea asked with a shine in the eyes. Rarely has she been allowed to visit the mortal world in these few years. Mostly under Nyx's shadows to get some information and remain hidden from the Olympians. So of course she would jump at the chance of an extended stay, especially if Percy was going with her. Percy is infiltrating the hunt, Tartarus' answer making Rhea immediately frown. She'd heard and even seen the aftermath of the hunt after their particular hunts, which were honestly purges of any man that happened to get caught when they were in the mood. She even witnessed one family camping get tortured by some of the elder hunters because the mother and daughter tried to defend their father, husband and brother, son even though they were boys. And the most sickening part was Artemis watched on with near indifference and even advised on how to make it more effective against the males. If anything, after her pride was hurt when Percy saved her in the giant war, she'd become crueler and colder to any man she saw. Rhea had gone straight to her room and cried after witnessing it and being forced to do nothing lest she reveal her escape to the Olympians. Luckily Percy managed to cheer her up with hugs, cookies, and snuggling while watching some cheesy movie. However, now she would need to help Percy get in and have to socialize with the barbarians when she'd probably want to brain them with her bow staff. Do we have to infiltrate them? Why not just kill them? You know Rhea hates something when she suggests violence. Tartarus sighed at Ray's question before giving her the same reasoning he'd given Nyx and Percy. She thought it over before nodding and then looking at Percy. So you'll turn into a wolf. Can you show me? Rhea asked eagerly, making Percy smile faintly as he nodded. Soon he took his form again and looked at Rhea with that adorable tilt of the head. Rhea made a noise that sounded suspiciously like squee, before she gave Percy a flying hug and buried her head in his fur as well. Tartarus sighed before muttering, this will take a while. Nyx on the other hand just giggled. How she loved these two, making her happy for the first time in centuries. D.A. Chapter 9. Reclaiming Family 3. Mortal World. It was nighttime in California. The night air was cool and soothing as light breezes caressed the tree leaves, the moon shining brightly with a cold light. In a clearing the shadows started to coil and condense in the center, an eerie aura of cold and darkness suffocating the air. All animals went silent, from the crickets to the few deer out in this evening. Soon the darkness formed a shape of a hulking wolf and rider before it dissipated to reveal Percy and Rhea. Percy's fur made him next to invisible in the lingering shadows as even the light of the moon touching him seemed to be soaked up, never to be seen again. Rhea looked like a 12-year-old girl, her clothes changed to simple jean shorts and a snug brown shirt, all ruffled up and looking a little dirty for extra effect. Her eyes were also changed to a soft green to not give away her power, and with a small obsidian earring made by Nyx, Artemis would think that Rhea is little more than a demigod of a minor god. Percy also had a collar made of the same material that would make his power feel like a wolf from Lupa's pack. Their backstory wasn't that sound, especially his size, but it would have to do. So where are they exactly? Rhea asked as Percy took off in a light jog gallop. Towards the south. I can sense them about a mile away, he thought back since he couldn't risk anyone knowing he could speak in this form. He could sense anything with a shadow within several miles of him thanks to his partial domain, so he knew exactly where the hunt was currently camped. Rhea held on tight as he picked up speed, his form looking like a shadow gliding along the forest floor. He loved the feeling of the night and darkness around him as he ran at speeds even Artemis hunters wouldn't be able to keep up, the cool wind in his face as Rhea snuggled into his soft fur. He was glad he was a wolf, otherwise she might have seen him blushing at the contact. He really couldn't get the heiress, and to make matters worse, he was pretty sure he liked her, but he also liked her daughter. What is he supposed to do in that situation? To make matters worse, he had no idea if either would return his affections, and that thought made his normally stony heart hurt even more than it had for years after he left this world behind. He gave a wolf's equivalent of a sigh as he trudged on, trying to focus more on finding the hunt rather than his jumbled feelings. However, the thought of that group, especially Artemis and Phoebe, made his frigid blood boil. He would see those two ripped apart, but not before taking away everything they hold dear and having them literally begging for any form of death. His thoughts continued to the point he released a blood-curdling growl while the ground beneath him froze on contact with his paws. Percy, Rhea whispered gently as she hugged his neck from behind. Just her voice was enough to calm him down, his entire frame relaxing as he sent her a mental thank you. He felt her nod into his neck as he continued to move through the forest nearly soundless, his senses picking up every scent, sight, and sound around him. Soon he picked up the sound of chatter and laughing along with the sense of cooked meat, marshmallows, and a campfire. Found them, he told Rhea as he turned in their direction. Soon he arrived at the edge of their camp, just out of the firelight as Rhea dismounted him. With that, Percy backed up a few feet, letting the darkness envelop him, presence and all. With him hidden, Rhea continued on to the next part of the plan. Hello, she called in a tired and timid voice, making the laughter abruptly stop. Soon the hunters appeared, a solid 30 of them ranging from 6 to 17-year-olds, all with bows in hand but no arms notched yet. Soon a familiar hunter wearing a tiara stepped up, her electric blue eyes looking at Rhea intently. Who are you? She asked with stern though not unkind tone. Mira, Rhea answered while fiddling with the hem of her shirt. Well Mira, what are you doing here? Talia asked as she stepped closer but kept one hand in her pocket, obviously gripping her hidden spear in case Mira turned out to be a threat. Oh, if only she knew. I'm lost, Rhea replied nervously while looking at Talia with pleading eyes. My mom said I had to run south, something about a camp, and they would tell me who my dad is. A demigod, huh? Talia commented before she glanced back to the group of gathered girls. Soon a particular 12-year-old approached with auburn hair and silvery yellow eyes. Artemis, Percy growled in his mind as she approached Rhea. Oh, how he wanted to simply attack now and tear her throat out, to make her scream and cry as she forced to watch him destroy the hunt. He kept himself in check however as he carefully watched the hunters behind her. It didn't take him long to spot her. Obviously the youngest one. A little girl with dark brown hair and bright blue eyes, his mother's cheeks and nose, and a scent that was slightly similar to his own. There was his sister, Andromeda Jackson. He'd only managed to see her once, when she was little more than a year old. All before Hera initiated her plan and took 8 months of his life away. He wished with all his heart he could just walk up to her and hug her, but for now he needed to remain silent. What is your story, girl? Artemis asked after inspecting Rhea and subtly reaching out with her own power to get a read on Ray's. Luckily Nyx's charms worked like, well, charms. A week ago a tall man with one eye appeared and attacked my house. My MMOM was hurt. Rhea started to sniffle before continuing. There was too much blood, but before the monster could get me, my mom threw this dagger at it. Rhea pulled out a small celestial bronze dagger with dried blood on it from her back pocket. It hit the monster in the head and he exploded into gold dust. Then my mom told me about a camp and to run away, and to leave her behind. Rhea was fully crying now, rubbing one of her hands into her eye as she pitifully looked at Artemis. But he kept me safe and helped me travel here. He Artemis asked venomously as she suddenly had her bow in hand and the other hunters copied her while scanning around. Where is the boy that accompanied you? Did he take advantage of you? TCH. Typical. She didn't say anything bad about me and Artemis already thinks I'm the reason bad shit happened, Percy thought while rolling his eyes from the shadows. No, he's my companion, Rhea muttered softly. He was hunting when the attack happened but he's kept me safe ever since I got him. Companion? Talia asked this time as she lowered her spear though she kept scanning the trees. Umbra, Rhea answered while clearing her face before asking in a hopeful voice, want to meet him. He's big and strong and, well, the only thing my dad left for me when I was 5. Artemis and Talia glanced at each other before Talia slowly nodded while Artemis maintained a steady grip on her bow. Rhea gave them a faint smile before turning around to face him and called excitedly, Umbra. Come here boy. Percy waited a few moments before making any movement. He then slowly crept out of the shadows, the hunters gasping and taking steps back at his sheer size as he towered beside Rhea. Big ass wolf, Talia muttered as she looked at him with wide eyes. Yep, was Ray's peppy reply as she hugged his legs since she couldn't reach his shoulder. He's big and fluffy. Still a damned male, Phoebe sneered with an arrow aimed straight at him. He would have growled at her but doing that would get the entire hunt into aiming at him and killing them all wasn't the plan, yet. No. Rhea shouted as she stood in front of him with her arms spread. I won't let you hurt him. I've had him since he was a puppy. He's a good boy and really nice and protective. They were at a standoff, some of the hunters keeping an arrow aimed at him while others glanced nervously at Artemis. She seemed to be thinking about it before looking at Rhea intently. And you? Are you planning to join the hunt? Rhea shuffled her feet as she looked as if thinking about it. In all honesty she wouldn't be caught dead swearing into Artemis' hunt. After a while she looked back at Artemis and spoke shyly, my mom wanted me to go to the camp. Can I at least see it before deciding? Artemis hummed as she scratched her chin, occasionally glancing at him. After a while she nodded. Very well, I shall allow you to travel with us since we were heading in that direction anyways. It will take up to 2 weeks or so but that should give you more than enough time to see how the hunt is the right choice. Now, as for your companion, should he show any typical male behavior or try anything on our wolves, I will skin him alive. As if you could, they both thought through their mental connection while Rhea smiled and nodded. With that Artemis waved the hunt off and all returned to the campfire except for Talia and Andromeda, who walked up to Artemis and lightly tugged at her shirt to get her attention. Mommy, she said in a gentle voice. At her words Percy felt his cold hatred return with a vengeance as he looked at the goddess. How dare she try to take Sally's place after she murdered their family? If it hadn't been for Rhea hugging his leg he would have pounced and mauled Artemis to a bloody stain. Calm down, Rhea said soothingly in his mind making him take a deep breath as he watched his little sister. See can I pet him? She asked shyly as she looked at him. Artemis had a conflicted look at the request, probably something about males and being pigs but after she glanced at Rhea and got an assuring nod, she looked back at Andromeda. Yes you may, Atalanta. Percy suppressed a growl again. Artemis then left after sharing a glance with Talia while Andromeda looked at them nervously but Rhea simply walked up to her and took her hand before gently pulling her towards Percy. Percy on his part laid down so that he didn't look so imposing, even going as far as to lowering his head onto the ground and throwing out some puppy eyes at her. Andromeda giggled, a musical sound that filled Percy's heart with joy, as she got a little closer before tentatively reaching out with a shaky hand. Percy slowly brought his snout up to nuzzle her hand, even licking it affectionately to get more giggles out of her. Soon enough she worked up the courage to come to Percy's side and begin to pet and hug him, making his tail wag while he continued to nuzzle her from time to time. While doing that he paid close attention to the conversation Talia and Rhea were having. I didn't know Lady Artemis had a daughter, Rhea said as she looked at Talia curiously. She's adopted, Talia whispered too low for Andromeda to hear. From who? Rhea persisted through innocent questioning. No idea, Talia replied with a frown. She just showed up with her one night 5 years ago covered in blood. Said that her mother had been killed by an abusive father and that Lady Artemis rescued her before it was too late. I see, Rhea answered with a brief flash of anger in her eyes while glancing at Percy. His thoughts were the same. Now he had confirmation that Talia wasn't a part of the murder and that Andromeda was already being manipulated, that much easier to show her the truth really. Now he just had to plan on how to do it, but for now he focused on enjoying the contact with his little sister as Rhea and Talia continued to speak. Finally alone, Rhea murmured as she rested on top of Percy, using his fur as a blanket and pillow in one. So, what do you think? He asked while giving a once-over to the tent they'd been given. He could tell it had minor privacy charms built in so they didn't have to worry about being overheard. It was also well furnished with a twin bed, dresser, desk, and a chest at the foot of the bed. Only problem Rhea had was all the clothes they gave her as for hunters. Hera's work, no doubt, Rhea answered as she rolled off his back only to curl up into his side. You're enjoying this too much, he chuckled only to receive a cheeky grin. But, what are we going to do about it? If Hera did anything, then Andromeda doesn't even have any baby memories we could use to tell her the truth. Not exactly, Rhea retorted with a raised finger. Hera may have mind abilities but they don't compare to my sister's. Mnemosyne, Percy thought while looking at Rhea intently. That was one titan that again, had not been set free after Percy's request since he didn't even know about her. Rhea actually helped Nyx free her a year or so ago in mortal time and she'd been in Tartarus with them ever since. Yep, Rhea replied while shuffling around to get comfortable. I'll just pray to her for a small blessing so we can correct the damage done and return the memories. Hera can sever and hide them but she's not good actually taking them away permanently. Now we just have to work quickly before we get to the camp. Agreed, Percy replied as he set his head down and closed his eyes. I'll get you back Andromeda, we'll be a family again, just you wait. D.A. Chapter 10, Siblings Reunited. 3 days had passed since Rhea and Percy joined the hunt. In that time they'd memorized the patterns of the hunters and usual activities, looking for any chances to separate Andromeda from them so they could speak to her. So far, Percy had noticed she was a surprisingly early riser, just like Sally had been. Knowing that, Percy had taken to getting up even earlier and shadowing her while she went about her morning business, which was usually walking around camp, exploring the nearby woods alone with a wolf or two from the companion pack, and generally enjoying the first bits of dawn alone. She was smart from what he could tell and as sweet as Sally, always trying to get smiles out of everyone even when they were having a bad day. Hell, he was pretty sure Andromeda was the only one who'd ever gone into Talia's tent to wake her up because she was lonely and came back out alive. Although, that made him wonder why was it that Artemis left her alone at such hours, maybe the goddess wasn't one for getting up at 5 in the morning. Though generally the entire hunt was up by 7:30 at the latest. The same thing was happening now except for a key difference. Instead of getting a few wolves from the pack, Andromeda left to explore without them, curious about the newest location the hunt had stopped at. Apparently this was the first time the hunt was stopping by Camp Jupiter in several years so she was very excited. Percy trailed silently after her, keeping an eye out for any threats that may be hiding in wait. He would have loved to walk beside her but he knew it would be too soon and some of the hunters still eyed him. The only times he got to enjoy her company was during the campfire that she would willingly sit by him and Rhea just to pet him. He enjoyed that immensely but still his heart yearned for more. Still, he needed to bide his time and impatience wouldn't help him at all. So he watched her silently from the shadows, listening to her humming as she leisurely walked through the forest. They walked for some time until they arrived at a small creek where Andromeda sat down and took off her shoes before she dipped her feet in the cool stream, sighing in content. He sat back and merely watched, wondering what would be the best way to approach her. However, before he could think of anything he heard something snap from across the stream. They both looked to see an injured boy, probably somewhere around 13 years old, stumbling out of the bushes. Percy could instantly tell it was a demigod by the scent and small sword in his hands. His purple t-shirt was ripped up and he looked like he'd been running for some time. He had dirty blonde hair and brown eyes with a lightly tanned complexion, his gait off since he was favoring his left leg. The boy looked up to see Andromeda before he stopped. He probably recognized her hunter apparel considering that he suddenly looked more nervous as he scanned around before putting away his sword and raising his hand to look as harmless as possible. Hi, he said softly as Andromeda slowly got up and fidgeted with her hands. I'm Ryan. Hello, she replied shyly while looking equally nervous. I'm Atalanta. Nice name, Ryan complimented before he slowly lowered his hands. Are you a huntress of Artemis? No, not yet, Andromeda replied almost sadly before perking up, but mommy says I will soon. Oh, cool, Ryan replied easily as he continued to look around. Hey, have you seen anyone else with a shirt like mine? I got separated from my team during our quest when a group of Cyclops attacked us. No, I haven't, Andromeda replied as she looked around as well before focusing on Ryan again, but maybe mommy might know. I can bring you with me if you want. She asked sweetly with such a warm smile that Ryan couldn't help but smile at her. Sure, thank you, Ryan said as he walked a little closer and was about to offer a handshake when Percy caught the sound of something moving through the air. He'd been so entrenched in his sister's exchange that he failed to notice the new presence, or react in time to stop what was coming. He watched, in shock, as a silver arrow embedded itself into Ryan's chest before he could shake Andromeda's hand. He gasped as Andromeda screamed in fright while falling back. Then, he coughed up some blood before his eyes rolled back into his head as he fell back, dead before he even hit the ground. Percy's head snapped to the direction the arrow came from to see one of the most hated of hunters walking out of the shadows with a sneer on her face. Phoebe, the only hunter that rivaled Artemis in her hate for men and the most violent of the bunch being a child of Ares. Andromeda for her part was in shock as she looked at Ryan's still form and Percy continued to watch silently from the shadows, restraining every fiber in his being from killing the hunter here and now. Why? Andromeda asked in a weak voice as she finally looked at the hunter. He was a boy, Phoebe answered as if it was all the reason she needed, and was about to take advantage of you so I killed him. But he didn't do anything wrong, Andromeda defended as she started to tear up while looking at Ryan. Him being alive was enough wrong already, Phoebe continued as she put away her bow. Andromeda didn't look at her as she slowly crawled closer to Ryan before slowly reaching forward to close his eyes. But before she could, Phoebe rushed forward and harshly slapped her hand away while screaming, "What the Hades do you think you're doing?" Andromeda stuttered in fear as she backed up from Phoebe. Damn girl. Don't you get it? We hate men. The filthy, deceitful, lying, pigs. They don't deserve any honor or last rites. Phoebe ranted as Andromeda started to cry while cowering away. You're so lucky Artemis even bothered taking a liking to you, Phoebe muttered darkly, but Andromeda caught the comment. What? She asked in confusion. Bother with me. But, she's my mommy, why wouldn't she? Phoebe noticed her slip and bit out a curse while glaring at Andromeda. Nothing, little girl, she spat before turning away. Make sure to return to the hunt soon or your mother will be upset and punish you. Andromeda shivered at her words and Percy knew in that moment that Andromeda had been punished before. For what, he didn't know or care. All that mattered to him was that regardless of what happened, he was getting Andromeda as far from the hunt as he could. He then watched as Phoebe stalked away while Andromeda pulled her knees to her chest and started to sob. When Percy was sure Phoebe was gone, he slowly approached from the shadows, purposely making his footfalls loud so Andromeda would hear him coming. When he stepped on a brittle stick, her head snapped open to look at him. She looked spooked for a moment, but he still got closer before laying down just a few feet away from her and waited to see if she would approach. After a few minutes of staring at each other, she did, until she was curled up in between his front legs and resting her head against his chest as his neck wrapped over her. She was still sobbing, but it was getting softer by the minute and he could feel her relaxing. Then, surprisingly, she started to speak to him. Why do you always feel so safe? She asked as she snuggled into his fur. Like I know you from somewhere. So Hera can separate memories but she can't take away familiar sensations and presences, he thought, recalling the one time he had her in his arms and played with her for hours when he visited his mother and Paul. His mother did mention that Andromeda had been especially calm and happy when she played with Percy, well, as much as a 1-year-old could before getting hungry or sleeping. Perhaps you do know me, he thought, but was surprised to see her suddenly sit up and look at him in the eyes. Oh shit. I didn't filter where my thoughts went. He berated himself as Andromeda continued to stare at him. Why you talked, she said in wonder. He sighed, knowing he couldn't get out of his one, so he nodded and watched with amusement as her eyes widened. Wow. You're a talking wolf, she shouted in glee. Actually, you can hear me in your thoughts, he corrected, making her frown in confusion. So you can't actually talk? She asked in clear disappointment. I never said that, he whispered, his voice carrying an underlying growl. Thanks to being a wolf, I just prefer to talk with thoughts, he finished mentally. That's so cool. Wait till I tell mommy and Auntie Talia, Andromeda cheered but frowned when Percy shook his head. No, you can't tell them about me, he said somewhat sadly. Why? She asked. Because, it would lead to bad things, he replied while lowering his head. Like what? She asked. I can't tell you that right now, but please, promise me you won't tell them, okay? He asked her while looking at her intently. She studied him for some time before she slowly nodded. Okay, I won't, I promise, she added while hugging his neck briefly. Then, after a few minutes, she pulled back and looked into Percy's eyes. Why are the hunters so mean to boys? She asked him. The ones that come by aren't that bad, but mommy always treats them bad and lets some of the hunters hurt them. At least Auntie Talia doesn't join them, and mommy tried to get me to join but I said no. She shouted at me once and almost hit me when I asked her to stop, but then apologized a little later saying it was too soon. What have they told you about boys? He asked, trying to keep his cool at the thought of Artemis laying a finger on his sister. Just that they're terrible and cause all the suffering in the world, but I don't see how, she replied with a sad frown. I mean, I've heard horror stories but the boys that I've seen look more scared and alone than anything. Quote. So you don't believe that all boys are terrible? He asked. No, Auntie Talia sometimes tells me stories about a brother she had but that he disappeared years ago, and mommy doesn't let her mention the name. Something about the hunt searching for him for a few years but never finding him, Andromeda answered. What if I told you stories about him too? He asked as he shifted his paws around his sister so both were more comfortable. You know him. Can you tell me his name? She asked excitedly but Percy shook his head. How about I tell you stories about him and later, when I think you're ready, I'll tell you his name, he offered her. She eagerly nodded making him chuckle before he looked up at the sky between the leaves of the leaves. I think we have a little story time right now. D.A. Chapter 11, Siblings Reunited 2. Atalanta was feeling great as she skipped through the camp on the way to the campfire. It had been nearly 2 weeks and they would soon arrive to Camp Jupiter just like her mommy said. In that time traveling she had gotten really close to Mira and her wolf, Umbra. Every morning she would explore with him, sometimes even getting to ride on his back and hear all kinds of stories about the lost hero of Olympus. At times she wondered why he sounded so sad and bitter when he mentioned that particular title but he usually brushed it off if she tried to ask more about it. Still, the stories were amazing. To think that one boy, at 12, had killed the Minotaur with no training and then had so many adventures. He'd traveled to the underworld, the sea of monsters, and the old world. He fought titans, sometimes alone or other times with help and saved the thrones of the gods. He'd held the sky up and rescued her mommy which made him super cool. That wasn't even the best part either. Even after the Second Titan War, he fought again in the Second Giant War, became a praetor of Camp Jupiter, helped united the demigods fighting the giants, and even defeated Gaia himself. She was so desperate to learn his name but Umbra never said it and she couldn't ask the other hunters since they weren't supposed to mention the name of that hero if they knew it. Still, she was sure Umbra would keep his promise and tell her someday. But for now she settled for sitting against Umbra's side, right next to Mira, as they listened to songs around the campfire. As they sat Atalanta glanced around at the other hunters and couldn't help but feel like something was wrong. She wasn't sure why but she'd always had these migraines and nightmares that didn't make sense. They were mostly of a woman and man that she couldn't place in screams. Then there was a face with the brightest, sea-green eyes she'd ever seen. Of course, the first time she'd had the nightmares she told her mommy and then she called this other woman in. She looked regal, with a white chiton, dark brown hair tied into a braid, and some fancy jewelry around her biceps and necks. The woman had approached her and then she'd blacked out, but there were no more nightmares. However, on the same night Rhea and Umbra arrived, they started again. Just little snippets and that gave her small headaches but she didn't tell her mommy this time. It was as if there was a soothing voice in the back of her head telling her to not let her mommy know, that those nightmares meant something more. She decided to tell Umbra about it tonight instead, right after everyone went down for the night and mommy was gone to drive her chariot. She waited patiently while halfway snuggling into Umbra's side as the girls sang their songs and joked around. It sometimes surprised her how these seemingly friendly girls could turn into scary and mean hunters whenever a boy appeared or was even mentioned. So far, she was pretty sure only she, Mira since she was new, and Talia didn't follow the trend. In fact, just recently she'd started to notice how some of the girls whisper about Talia might not be the lieutenant if it wasn't for her being a daughter of Zeus since she didn't act like the rest of the hunt. Phoebe, that meanie, was the most upset about it but they hid it whenever Talia was around. She'd even noticed that sometimes her mommy would listen in and not shut them up or tell them that they were wrong. Auntie Talia also looked sadder than usual and would spend more time alone unless Atalanta joined her or now, Mira and surprisingly Umbra would keep her silent company. It made her sad to see her normally positive aunt like that but maybe Umbra could help her too. After all, he knew about that hero that her auntie called her brother, so maybe they could relate and help each other, but Umbra said that he would decide when to let Talia know about him. Soon the campfire songs finally ended and most of the hunters left to their tents without complaint. Atalanta for her part remained snuggled to Umbra and Mira with a blanket draped over them that Talia had brought specifically for them, since this wouldn't be the first time they simply stayed out and slept under the stars together. Atalanta occasionally opened an eye to peek around but saw that all the lights for the hunter tents were off, which meant everyone was asleep. She then checked to see if Mira and Umbra were awake but nearly shrieked when two pairs of eyes were trained on her with clear amusement. "Did you know you fidget a lot when you're antsy or excited?" Umbra asked with a wolf smirk. "Someone wants to talk about something," Mira whispered with wagging eyebrows. Atalanta faintly blushed in embarrassment but soon enough nodded. Silently the trio got up before both girls got onto Umbra's back, since he was perfectly silent when he wanted to be, and in the darkness not even her mommy could track him, much to her displeasure. Soon they were a fair distance from the camp, allowing them to talk regularly, and Atalanta noticed that the moon wasn't over them yet and wouldn't be for a few hours. Something in her gut told her that it wouldn't be good if mommy saw them speaking. She then glanced at Mira and Umbra only to see them patiently waiting for her to speak. She started as her feet shuffled nervously. "So, I have something to tell you both." Mira raised an eyebrow while making a continue motion with her hand. "So, I've been having these nightmares," she whispered as she looked at them. "And, sometimes it's a man and woman that I don't know. They were screaming and bloody. All I hear is the screaming and someone laughing, but that's it. Then, sometimes it's a dream where I see this boy with sea green eyes looking at me, but I don't know him either." As she spoke, both Umbra and Mira gave her a sad look before Mira sighed. She then glanced at Umbra before turning back to her. "I think it's best you and Umbra speak about this in private. I'll be nearby, so shout if anything, but otherwise, excuse me." And with that, Mira walked off, out of the clearing and into the shadows of the forest, while Umbra approached Atalanta until he was just a few inches away. "So," he started, using his actual voice to let Atalanta know that this conversation was serious. "Would you like me to explain the nightmares, or show you?" "What?" she asked nervously. "Did you know about them?" "Not that you were having them, but I've dealt with something similar," he answered with a tired sigh. "And they aren't nightmares but memories. You're trying to remember something from your past that was taken away, but I can help it all come back." "Why, you can?" she asked. "Yes, but it will change everything about your life and it will hurt, but know that I will always be here for you," Umbra replied as his snout inched closer. "So, are you ready?" She looked at him hesitantly, wondering on what to do. What did he mean that it would change her life? Would it take her mommy and Talia away? She didn't want to lose them, but at the same time, she wanted to know what happened in her past. Who were those people that felt so important to her? She had to know, regardless of what might change, but at least Umbra is with her. So she nodded and watched as Umbra closed the distance so that his snout was touching her forehead. There was a faint glow before she suddenly felt a head-splitting headache, making her knees buckle as she slammed her eyes shut and screamed. All the images and nightmares suddenly assaulted her again, but this time in clarity. She was sitting up in what looked like a crib. She was gurgling and squirming around until a light turned on and a beautiful woman with eyes and hair like her appeared. She gave her a warm smile and cooed at her, making her baby self giggle and reach out with her hands to the woman, no, her real mommy. She could feel it in her bones that this was her true mommy, not Lady Artemis. Her mommy was about to pick her up when there was a shout from somewhere outside the room, making her mommy start as she turned around, calling a name that she didn't catch. Her mommy left to check but soon ran back with terror in her eyes. She was about to pick her up when she cried out in pain and fell short of the crib, a silver dagger embedded in her back. Her baby self started to cry as a familiar 12-year-old with auburn hair appeared, her hands bloody as she looked down at her mommy with contempt. At the sight, Atalanta felt her heart break at the betrayal and lies revealed to her. Umbra was right, everything would change with these memories, and it hurt so much. How could she even think to look at Artemis or any of her hunters after this? How could she even stay? Did Talia know any of this? All those thoughts raced through her head and she continued to watch with growing dread. She walked past her sobbing mommy and picked up her baby self, not caring how much she was crying, before glancing back at her mommy as she bled out. She grimaced before walking out with her baby self and entered a living room. There she saw another familiar child of Ares sitting on who she knew to be her daddy's stomach, slowly dragging a dagger across his face as he screamed. She also noticed that his waist was bleeding profusely and it looked like his legs were broken. Artemis exchanged some words with Phoebe before pointing to where her mommy was. Phoebe nodded with a smirk and then, in a flash of silver, they were gone. Then the scene changed into the ones from Atalanta's dreams. This time she was in her mommy's arms as she smiled down at her, and now, Atalanta could hear her. My little baby, her mommy cooed in such a warm tone that it made Atalanta's heart ache with want. This is your big, goofy brother. She turned her as she said that, and Atalanta saw the boy with sea green eyes looking at her with a huge smile. Soon she was in his arms as he looked at her with love and care, making her giggle happily as she touched his face with her chubby hands. Hey little sis, he said in a gentle voice as he looked at her, I'm your goofy brother, and my name is D.A. Chapter 12. Siblings Reunited 3. Percy, she whispered as she opened her eyes after the pain settled. She looked up at Umbra as he watched her. I have a big brother and his name is Percy. Yes, he is, Umbra said softly as he lowered his head to be closer to her. And he is the hero Talia talked about, the lost hero of Olympus. But, why'd he leave me? She asked as tears started to build in her eyes. Didn't he want me? He just left me after Artemis took me and killed our parents. He was forced to, Umbra explained sadly. He couldn't do much at the time, and if he tried to fight the hunt, it would have been too easy to get you hurt, so he left but swore to get you back when he was ready. But, I want him here now. She shouted as the tears fell. I don't want to stay with those murderers. Why can't he just come back? She cried as her tiny hands balled into fists. I want my brother. She started crying her heart out as tears blurred her vision, her chest throbbing with the pain of the betrayals. All she wanted now was Percy. Umbra said he swore to come back for her, and it was the only hope left for her, otherwise she would run away. She couldn't even think about returning to that camp of murderers. Maybe only two had a hand in her parents' death, but that didn't erase their crimes against others throughout the years. He's already here, Umbra's voice cut in, making her crying abruptly stop in surprise. What? She asked as she looked at Umbra through her tears. She watched as Umbra stepped back before the shadows condensed over him, his form changing into that of a human. The shadows dispersed to reveal a tall man dressed in a cloak of darkness with his hood pulled up, but even with that she could tell he was very fit and muscular. He stepped closer and kneeled before her as his hood was pulled back to show her his face. She gasped as she recognized his features, even if his once sea green eyes had changed to swirls of black fire with glowing, icy blue pupils that looked at her with the same love and care that her brother had. Pete Percy. She choked out as a spark of hope ignited in her chest. Hello, Andromeda, he replied as he cupped her cheek and used his thumb to wipe away her tears. I came back for you. Andromeda, her true name. And her brother was right there before her. She didn't even hesitate as she dived at him, hugging his neck like a lifeline as she cried into his shoulder. His strong and warm arms wrapped around her as he soothed her with soft words. She'd never felt so whole before, safe within her brother's embrace, her true family. She didn't want to let him go, so she tightened her grip and nuzzled into his neck as her sobs died down. But sadly, it seemed that the fates were not being kind as she heard the familiar sound of an arrow being notched, joined with a scream. What the Hades is going on here? Andromeda turned in time to see Phoebe release her arrow straight at her, but before she could so much as make a sound, Percy's hand shot out and caught the arrow between two fingers. He kept one of his arms wrapped protectively around her as he glared at her, his hood suddenly pulled back up with his eyes glowing ominously within the shadow of it, making the normally stubborn hunter step back in fear even as she kept another arrow aimed at them. I knew keeping you would be a mistake, Phoebe sneered after regaining some courage. And who are you, boy? Percy didn't even bother to answer her as he looked down at Andromeda with soft eyes before speaking gently, head to the edge of the clearing. Mira is waiting for you to take you away from here. What about you? Andromeda asked as she clutched onto his coat. I'll meet you in a special place a little later, he replied before he kissed her on the forehead. Now go and trust me. I'm not leaving you this time or ever again. Promise? She asked with wet eyes. Pinky promise, he replied while raising his pinky to her. She looked at it before locking their fingers for a moment. Then, once they separated, she hopped up to kiss him on the cheek before turning and running towards the edge of the clearing, Mira already in sight with a warm smile. Hey, you're not going anywhere. She heard Phoebe shout with another arrow being loosed, but as she glanced back she saw the shadows from a barrier between her and the arrow, making it bounce off and leaving her unharmed. She soon reached Myra's side and glanced at her before asking, what's Percy going to do to Phoebe? Paying back a debt, Mira replied with a blank face. She didn't need to say if for Andromeda to know she meant killing Phoebe, but even then she didn't want her brother to fall to the same thing as the hunters. She understood that it needed to be done, but still, she looked back at Percy before shouting out, Percy. He looked at her over his shoulder while Phoebe's eyes widened at the revelation. Please, make it quick. Percy looked at her for a few moments before slowly nodding. She gave him a smile before turning to Mira, who placed a hand on her shoulder. Then, with a burst of shadow, they were gone. Percy watched as they shadow traveled away before looking back at the still shocked Phoebe. Oh Rhea, you're too good to me, he thought with a smirk. He could feel the barrier she erected over them long before Phoebe showed up after Rhea purposefully let her in. Phoebe had been watching them more than the other hunters, especially on the nights they stayed out together, so they knew the hunter would follow. Just to get a treat out of their sweet goodbye, Rhea had erected a barrier with several functions. It suppressed all sound from leaving and made them blurry to the outside so not even Artemis would notice them if she happened to fly over them. As an added precaution, no prayers would escape, so Phoebe was effectively stranded, and she didn't even know it. The only other way Artemis could be alerted would be when a hunter dies or breaks the oath. Percy didn't have any interest in the second method, but the first would do after he made sure she'd suffered enough. Let it be known that was the only time he would willingly lie to his little sister. Phoebe had too much to pay for to get a swift death. So, little hunter, what shall we do with you? He asked as he let darkness seep off his frame. It's not like you could do anything, boy. Phoebe shouted with another arrow aimed at him. And once my lady arrives, we'll finish off your damn family. I'll make that little bitch scream like I did her father. Oh, you do not know when to cut your losses, Percy growled as his fists clenched. Too bad for you. Before she could say anything else, he surged forward, closing the distance in a blink of the eye. She gasped at his sudden closeness but didn't react fast enough as his hand reached out and grasped her wrist. With a smirk he twisted, snapping her bones like twigs as she screamed to the high heavens and dropped her bow. He maintained his smirk as he used his free hand to backhand her across the mouth, blood splattering out along with a broken jaw. Come on, little huntress. Is this all you can do? Gang up on helpless mortals and children to assure yourself just because you were a sorry disgrace to your father. And that is big considering he's little more than a godly shit stain, he mocked as he tossed her across the field. She rolled like a rag doll until she landed on her back, tears already streaming down her cheeks, but Percy wasn't placated in the slightest. He slowly stalked to her as she tried in vain to crawl away while sobbing, the smell of piss already tainting the air. Too easy, he muttered as he raised his hand. At his whim, spears of shadows shot up from underneath Phoebe, piercing her through her arms, shoulders, shins, and thighs as she screamed again through her broken jaws. He twisted his hand, the shadows copying him until Phoebe was turned to face him, held spread eagle before him. You say you hate males, yet I've met few of his children that are such embodiments of him. You take the cake really, and I have no doubt that if you had been born male, you would have been a serial rapist and murderer of the worst degree. Funny. Maybe even the fates didn't want to allow a monster like you to reach full potential, he said as he stopped a few feet away from her. Your time has come, huntress, and this will not be over quickly. I won't even let your soul go to the underworld. Oh no, I've taken the time to make a special place just for you and the other traitors in the worst recesses of Tartarus. Now then, let's get on with your one-way ticket to hell. With that he took his massive wolf form, towering over the sniveling and begging huntress. His lips pulled back into a vicious snarl that would terrify even the fates before he lunged, and there was nothing more than broken screams and blood splattering. D.A. Chapter 13. Another Air I. A.N. You all are aware that since it is M-rated there will be lemons, yes. Okay, just putting it out there, but I will put warning and divisions for anyone wanting to skip the steamy times. I won't put warnings for nude scenes and brief glimpses of said activity though, since they probably won't be that explicit on those bits. Equals 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 equals. Talia woke up with a start when she heard a horrible scream. It was so full of pain and sadness that her hair stood on end as she jumped out of her bed and immediately ran out of the tent, completely ignoring the fact that she ran out in her sleepwear. Screw it. There was an emergency, and if it meant running out in panties and a see-through nightgown, then damn it she was going to do it. She'd only grabbed her knife while running towards the scream. Most of the senior hunters were already running with her in similar states of undress, some armed with bows, others with knives as well. They ran through the trees as quickly as they could, but as they ran, Talia noticed that the moon seemed incredibly dim, and that worried her. Soon they burst into a clearing and Talia spotted Artemis, bawling like a baby while kneeling beside what looked like a body. Talia and the others slowly creeped forward, shaken at the sight of their mistress looking so fragile. My lady. Talia asked gently, but Artemis didn't so much as react to her. It was only after Talia got close enough to really see the body that she understood why Artemis was like this. The immortals. She nearly screamed as she covered her mouth and backed up. Some of the others hunters close to her saw it as well, impaled, one even stumbling back before throwing up. Others dropped to their knees in shock as their eyes remained nailed to the body, and the youngest that just arrived started to cry. There, before Artemis, was Phoebe, or what was left of her. Her entire body had been mauled to pieces, literally. Her torso and waist had been separated, with her intestines being the only thing connecting them. Her left leg was missing and the right only had some traces of flesh on it. As for her torso, it was even worse. Her ribs had been ripped open to show that her heart was missing and her throat had been torn open. Lastly were the odd signs of frostbite all over her body, along with enormous bite marks which probably came from a hellhound. Even her blood looked like it had partially frozen over, and her skin was a sickly blue with some streaks of black. What happened here? One of the hunters, Mila, asked with trembling eyes as she looked around. Artemis still didn't answer, only seeming to cry harder. Talia understood why though. Phoebe had been her oldest hunter after Zoe died, and now she was gone too. Talia slowly walked closer to Artemis while looking around wearily. They had no way of telling if what did all this was still around, meaning they could all be in danger. My lady, we need to get to camp, please, she whispered gently while laying a hand on the goddess' shoulder. Artemis sobbed some more as she slowly turned while shifting into the form of a 5-year-old, clinging onto Talia for dear life. Talia held back a sigh as she picked her up, Artemis crying into her shoulder, and started to walk back towards the camp. They would have to come back for the body later, but for now, getting everyone in one location and safe was her top priority, while also taking care of a child at the moment. Speaking of children, Talia glanced around but didn't see Atalanta, Mira, or Umbra anywhere. She found that odd, knowing that they should have heard the screams since they were outside together when she draped that blanket over them before turning in herself. Kelly, Talia called to one of the senior hunters, can you find Atalanta and Mira for me? The hunter in question gave her a curious look before nodding and splitting off in the direction of Atalanta's tent as they arrived at the camp. Talia on the other hand walked straight to Artemis' tent and brought the goddess to her bed. She was still clinging on, so Talia sat down with the goddess on her lap and trying to soothe her. It took a few minutes before Kelly ran in with a frantic look. Talia! She screamed, they're gone. What? Talia snapped back, the crying goddess momentarily forgotten. Atalanta and Mira, they're gone. Kelly answered in a panicky voice. At hearing that her adopted daughter was gone as well, Artemis started to cry harder, and Talia could even tell that the moon dimmed from the wavering darkness that seemed to get thicker. What about Umbra? Any sign of him? She asked in growing concern. Umbra was bigger than just about any hellhounds she'd ever seen, including Mrs. O'Leary, so it was unlikely anything got to him. Hell, was probably the most dangerous thing aside from Artemis within a mile of the hunt's camp. And yet, now he was suspiciously gone along with the girl he'd been given to in Atalanta, someone who'd gotten awfully close to the new pair. The body also made it clear that some kind of canine did it, and Umbra was suddenly gone. Talia felt a shiver run down her spine as cold realization set in, her entire frame starting to tremble at the thought of what could have happened. Oh my gods, she whispered as she rapidly paled. He could have killed any one of us, and Mira brought him in right under our noses. With her own words, she knew that the hunt wouldn't trust any new arrivals. One seemingly innocent girl had brought a monster capable of killing any one of them, and they foolishly allowed it. And worst of all, she knew that Umbra could stand mere inches from you in the darkness and you'd never know he was there. Never again would the hunt feel safe in the forests and nights they called home. Percy sighed as he felt the cold water run over his face and down his back, staining the dark marble bloody red. The marble in front of him was so clear he could see his reflection, but right now he didn't want to see it. He'd lost control. He was too new to having an animal form and all the instincts that came with it. He'd been prepared to torture her, maim her, break her until what little that remained of her sanity finally crumbled, but to feed off her while she was still alive. That was beyond what he'd wanted, and it sickened him. How could he face his sister or Rhea with what he'd done? He sighed in frustration as he turned off the shower, the last remains of the water on his body freezing over before falling off his now dry skin as he started to move out of the shower. He'd just gotten back after dropping off Phoebe's soul to Tartarus, prime torturers in the deepest parts of the pit. Then he'd shadow traveled to the House of Night, their current lodgings, to get all the blood off his body. Every inch of his regular clothes, save for his cloak of pure darkness, had been caked in blood and gore to the point he had to simply dispose of them and get a new pair. Luckily his swords in their ring forms didn't get any form of stain even though he was pretty sure they had been coated in blood as well. What a mess, he thought as he dressed only in a pair of baggy sweatpants and stepped out of his bathroom. He glanced around his room, noting the large bed covered in silky, black sheets and pillows, the mahogany desk and dresser, and lastly a large bookshelf filled with scrolls and books Nix deemed necessary for his education of ancient history. The walls and floor were all made of glossy, black marble with no windows though the ceiling looked like the actual night sky with even his favorite constellations glowing in it. He sighed as he stepped out of his room, not feeling like he could sleep anytime soon. Maybe I should talk with Nix or something, he mused as he left into the long hall leading to the main foyer of the house. But as he was walking a door a few feet done from his own opened and out stepped someone he really didn't want to talk to right now, or more like he wanted to but didn't know how. Ray's goldish hazel eyes locked onto his flaming black ones, neither speaking for what felt like an eternity. It felt so awkward that Percy was getting ready to turn around but Rhea stopped him by placing a hand on his shoulder though he tried his hardest to not look her in the eyes. Percy, she said softly in her soothing voice, you should see your sister, she needs you. He noticed that she tilted her free hand to the door she'd just exited meaning that Andromeda was in there right now. Are you sure she needs a monster right now? He asked bitterly as he looked down at his feet. He heard her sigh but didn't look up, not wanting to see the disgust in her eyes that he knew was there. He was sure that she'd been able to sense what he did in her barrier before he finished off Phoebe and erased it himself. However, her next words left him shocked. You're not the only one, she said, making his head snap up to look at her sad and regretful eyes. What? He stuttered out. You're not the only one, who's lost control in their animal form, she answered hesitantly. Seeing his look of confusion she continued on. As you know, my sacred animal is the lioness. Well, most gods and titans don't take on the form of their sacred animal because they retain instincts and features of them. You mean? She nodded before pulling back her lips to show him a pair of fangs he'd never noticed before just like his own. Then she let her lips back down as she spoke. When I assumed my form, I lost control for 3 days and in that time, tears started to fall down her cheeks as she looked at him. She took a shaky breath before continuing. I've got the blood on innocence on my hands because I lost control and there is nothing I can do to take it back. So if you're a monster for losing control once on someone who deserved the punishment, then what am I? She started to full-on sob now as Percy looked at her in shock at this revelation. Rhea, the kindest of the peaceful titans, had committed a worse degree of murder than him. But, she was one of the sweetest and most forgiving people he knew. Besides, it wasn't like she was in control when it happened so why should she blame herself? You're not, he found himself saying before he could even think. She stopped sobbing to look at him in surprise as he gently cupped her cheek and rubbed away her tears. You are not a monster so never call yourself that, he said with conviction as he stared into her beautiful eyes. But, no. What's past is in the past. Right here, right now, I don't see a monster but a strong, beautiful, caring, loving, smart, and gentle woman who's helped keep me sane through decades of torturous training and helped me stay positive, he said to her, their faces so close that their noses were practically touching. Really? She asked softly, looking remarkably fragile right now and depending on his words, could break like a glass sculpture. Yes, every word of it, he replied without hesitation. D.A. Chapter 14. Another heir too. Really? She asked softly, looking remarkably fragile right now and depending on his words, could break like a glass sculpture. Yes, every word of it, he replied without hesitation. They stared into each other's eyes, a torrent of emotions passing through them. Then, driven by sheer instinct, he closed the distance and kissed her. She let out a squeak of surprise but soon enough returned the kiss, melting into his embrace. Her hands found their way to his hair as he pulled her by her waist, her chest pressed up against his. Then he felt her lower lip slip in between his and he nibbled it slightly, earning a delicious whimper from her. That sound made him growl as his hunger for her increased yet something in the back of his mind was telling him that now wasn't the time for this so reluctantly, he pulled back. He caught the tiny, disappointed whine coming from Rhea but he resisted tasting her again. They kept their foreheads together though as they looked at each other, finally noticing the love in each other's eyes after years of walking on egg shells around each other. He grinned a little and she smiled in return before she spoke. Go, your sister still needs you right now. Okay, but what are we now? He couldn't help but ask as he stared at her. We can talk about it later, she replied before pecking him on the lips. Though calling you my boyfriend sounds nice. With that, she took a step back and turned before walking away, Percy's eyes remaining glued to her figure as she turned a corner and was finally out of sight. He sighed as he looked up at the dark ceiling, now feeling a tiny amount of regret for what he did. Yes, he liked Rhea, maybe even love, though he wasn't going anywhere near that word anytime soon, not after what Annabeth did. But still, he was happy, and yet, he couldn't help but remember a pair of warm, orange eyes looking at him. He knew he liked Hestia as much as Rhea before, and with the time the two have spent together, his heart has grown a place for Rhea, but then, what did it mean for Hestia? He was so confused and his new wolf instincts were not helping, damn it. He sighed in frustration before remembering his sister and turning towards the door beside him. He noticed for the first time that there was a little gold plank that read, Andromeda, on it. He smiled at the thought of her finally being here with him. He silently opened the door and stepped in the dimly lit room to see Andromeda sleeping soundly in a bed similar to his, only with light blue sheets rather than black like his. He slowly walked closer before kneeling next to the bed and tucking a hair behind her ear, looking at her peaceful face. He gently stroked her head as he watched her sleep, promising to himself to always keeping her safe and happy like his mother would have wanted him to. We'll always be a family, Andy, he whispered before kissing her cheek lightly. He stood and was about to turn to leave, but then a tiny hand gripped his own. He looked in surprise to see that Andromeda wasn't asleep but looking at him groggily. Don't go, please, she said in a pleading tone. Stay with me. He looked at her for a moment before giving her a warm smile as he nodded. He got under the sheets with her and she instantly cuddled up to him, resting her head on his chest as he wrapped his arms around her protectively. He willed the room to darken fully before kissing the top of her head. I love you, Percy, Andromeda mumbled before she fully passed out after her long day. Love you too, Andy, he replied as he closed his eyes, the smile never leaving his lips. Percy, 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 was whispered into his ear. He grumbled as he opened one eye to see who was trying to wake him up. He found Rhea leaning over him with a faint smile. Come on, sleepyhead. You need to get up, she continued while poking his cheek. He grumbled a little more but didn't try to go back to sleep. Instead, he slowly sat up, noticing the little body still cuddled up to him with a familiar head of brown hair. He smiled at the sight as he got up, his sister complaining in her sleep even as he adjusted to holding her in his arms. Her head remained on his shoulder as he walked after Rhea and headed towards the kitchen for breakfast. During the walk, Andromeda finally woke up, though she was still groggy and held onto him. They arrived to the spacious kitchen in a few minutes, Percy handing over Andromeda to Rhea before the pair sat down on a stool next to the island in the middle of the kitchen. The kitchen was rather large, with black marble surfaces and stainless steel appliances. Large gas stove top and oven, double-decker fridge, and every sort of cooking utensil one could need. In other words, Ray's playground. Though with his improved cooking skills thanks to Hestia's blessing and Ray's teachings, Percy was a frequent user as well. Soon enough he got to work making chocolate chip pancakes, no other way, with eggs, bacon, and some sausage. As the smell of food wafted through the air, Andromeda was fully revived, drooling from her spot on Ray's lap as both watched him move back and forth around the kitchen. He smirked at her before quickly platting their food for them and serving himself. He decided to eat while standing across from them, occasionally making funny faces at Andromeda to make her giggle. Once the food was finished, they remained in a comfortable silence until Andromeda started to fidget while glancing at Percy. What's on your mind, Andy? He asked as he took their finished plates. Andromeda looked at her hands nervously before shyly asking, Big brother, what are you exactly? He raised an eyebrow at the question before glancing at Rhea. She shrugged at him before giving him a, go on, gesture. Well, I'm a primordial now. Well, almost, he answered, but it didn't seem to clear up any confusion for her. He sighed as he grabbed a knife and pricked his finger with it. Ichor started to flow out with tiny specks of red in it, a sign of the last dregs of his mortality. See. Once I claim my domains, I'll be a full primordial, but until then, it is still possible for me to die in combat. Wow, Andromeda said in awe as her eyes glimmered at him. My big brother is so cool. She shouted in glee, making Percy and Rhea laugh. Rhea too, you know, he added, making Andromeda gasp as she looked at the sheepish goddess. I'm like Percy, she said. I'm an heir to a domain but I haven't claimed it yet, so I'm not a full primordial either, but since I was a titan, I'm fully immortal. Wow, you're both so powerful, Andromeda murmured as she looked between them. Hee, I guess, he replied while rubbing his neck. He was about to say more, but then the shadows condensed beside him before Nyx stepped out of them, spooking Andromeda a bit, but Rhea quickly reassured her. Nyx looked between the three before smiling warmly at Andromeda. Hello there, Andromeda. My name is Nyx, she introduced herself, making Andromeda gape like a fish. HHI, she returned the greeting, which was obviously too adorable for Nyx because the next second she was squealing and pinching Andy's cheeks. Percy tried to stifle his laughter as Andromeda tried to escape Nyx with no such luck until Rhea finally came to her rescue after a good 5 minutes. Once they got settled, Rhea offered to take Andromeda exploring around the house without taking her near the horrors that would drive any mortal insane, of course. Andromeda seemed reluctant, but after a nod from Percy and a promise that he would join them later, she left. With the pair gone, Percy turned to Nyx, knowing that she came to discuss plans along with meeting Andromeda in person. So, what can I do for you, Nyx? He asked after a moment of silence. Well, she started as she sat down on one of the stools. With Andromeda here, two of my siblings wants to talk to you about her. Who? Percy asked suspiciously. Instead of answering, Nyx just waved to the space beside her. In a purple flash, another primordial appeared. He was relatively tall at 6 foot, 2 with platinum blonde hair and deep, purple eyes. Rosy and fair skin, a strong jawline and a slim but athletic build. He was dressed in a sharp black suit with a pink dress shirt and purple tie. Lastly were his large, purple feathered wings folded against his back. There stood Eros, primordial of love and attraction, and he wasn't the only one. Next to him was another man, a little shorter at 5 foot, 11, with salt and pepper hair, dark pink eyes, and the slightest stubble adding to his attractiveness. He was dressed in a similar suit to Eros, but his coat was open with a dark red buttoned shirt, the top 3 buttons undone, and black trousers. On his back was a pair of dark pink, feathered wings. This was Phanes, primordial of procreation and desire. The twin protogonoi looked at him somewhat nervously, their wings shuffling slightly as he waited for them to speak. DA. Chapter 15. Another Heir 3. He was dressed in a similar suit to Eros, but his coat was open with a dark red buttoned shirt, the top 3 buttons undone, and black trousers. On his back was a pair of dark pink, feathered wings. This was Phanes, primordial of procreation and desire. The twin protogonoi looked at him somewhat nervously, their wings shuffling slightly as he waited for them to speak. He was already suspicious of anyone wanting something to do with Andromeda, and the fact that it was these 2 primordial beings made him that much more protective of her. If he didn't like what they came here for, there would be Tartarus to pay. Well? He asked in a sharp tone as he looked down at the 2 gods, darkness slowly wafting off his frame as he stared them down. Percy, Eros started as he tried to meet his gaze. Before you do anything, know that we mean your sister no harm. Okay, and he persisted as he looked between the 2. Phanes sighed before he spoke up. Like you being the heir of Nyx and Erebus, we would like for Andromeda to be the heiress of love, attraction, desire, and procreation. Why? He asked as his eyes glowed with power and frost started to develop around him, his shadows growing thicker by the second. It's because she is like your mother. Phanes blurted out as he took a nervous step back while looking at Eros to continue. Like my mother? In what way? He asked, now more curious than anything as his shadows calmed down. Your mother was a mortal unlike any I've ever seen, Eros explained as he relaxed slightly. She was strong both in heart and mind. She wasn't capable of hate against anyone regardless of who they were or what they did. Even to the end when she used Medusa's head to kill Ugliano, after suffering his abuses and knowing how he treated you but keeping her head down to keep you safe from monsters for as long as possible, she didn't truly hate him, but she knew it was the only way to be rid of him since no god could intervene in her behalf. She had the resolve to do what was needed but still kept her heart and mind open to all options. She was the epitome of love in the purest forms, and your sister inherited that heart. Even now, after discovering the truth, she does not hate the hunters or Artemis. She may not want anything to do with them and there is definitely anger in her, but no hate. Phanes picked up next. Your sister will correct the love of this world after everything that disgrace of a love goddess did, granted her very birth came from the betrayal of 2 lovers, so can we really be surprised? Regardless, the world is flooded with lust, false love, and betrayals thanks to the Olympians, creating a cesspool of hate and misery in turn. That goddess has long since lost her way in her domain, and it led to some of the bloodiest wars in history. Her copulating with the war god and consistently having affairs with other Olympians, especially the married ones, didn't help, Eros added. Things like hate, lust, and other such vices will never disappear as they are part of nature, but right now the world is overrun with them. If you want to establish true peace in this world, the fundamentals of love must be restored. So please, Percy, the twins said as one before shocking him by bowing to him, let us bless your sister so that she may become our heir. Percy stood there, mouth gaping as he took in everything the two primordial beings said. He could have never thought that they would see his sister in such a light. Silence persisted for what felt like hours until Percy finally regained his bearings and ran a hand through his hair with a sigh. You truly believe in her? He asked softly as his shadows dissipated along with the frost. Yes, both replied immediately. Percy looked at them intently for several minutes before glancing at the silent Nyx, wondering what her thoughts on this were. Seeing his look, she nodded firmly with a small smile on her face. Think of it as a guarantee for the two of you to be together forever, she said with a tiny smirk. True, he murmured before looking at primordial twins. Fine. But only if she agrees to it. Thank you, both replied with another bow and smile. Now where is she? I was excited to meet the little bundle of joy. Right here, Rhea replied as she walked into the kitchen with Andromeda holding her hand and a stuffed wolf in her other arm. Percy smirked a little, seeing as the stuffed wolf Andromeda had looked exactly like him. I wonder where they got that from though, he mused as Andromeda looked at the two new arrivals nervously. Hey Andy, Percy said as he walked to her side and kneeled beside her to give her some comfort. These two gods wanted to speak to you. Really? She asked shyly as she looked at them. Yep, he replied while pointing, that's Eros, primordial of love and attraction, and the other one is Phanes, primordial of desire and procreation. Andromeda gasped as she learned who they were, and soon both protogonoi gave her warm greetings. Once that finished, Percy told her about what they wanted to give her and why. She seemed to be deep in thought for a while before she looked at Percy with big eyes. Does that mean I get to be strong and stay with you forever? She asked in a hopeful voice. Yep, Percy replied with a big grin before she tackled him in a tight hug. Once she finally let go, she turned to Eros and Phanes before shouting excitedly, okay. Eros and Phanes chuckled before each placed a hand on one of her shoulders. She was surrounded in a mixed light of purple and pink before it faded to reveal her, and all the changes. Her face had somehow become irresistibly cute, with a round nose and slightly chubby cheeks. Her hair became a richer brown, but, like him with the icy blue, her hair had purple and pink tips that reached a little past her shoulder. Her skin also gained a deeper shade of tan, and even though she was still young, Percy could tell she was going to grow into an absolute bombshell, the likes of which would put her in the same leagues of beauty with Rhea, Nyx, and Hestia in Percy's opinion. But the most mesmerizing thing about her were her eyes. Her irises had purple borders that slowly got lighter until it turned into a bright blue near the center, while her pupils became pink. Altogether she was already beautiful and cute at the same time, and would only grow more so with time. Percy could already feel the warmth and love that she radiated around her, making everyone smile at her, while Percy felt his brotherly desire to keep her safe and happy skyrocket. That is merely our blessings, child, Eros said with a triumphant grin. Soon you shall train, and when ready, you will truly become our heir. D.A. Chapter 16. Gathering the Fallen Eye. 3 years later, 15 in Tartarus. Percy slowly opened his eyes as an annoying ringing was going off somewhere to his left. He turned his head in that direction and spotted the damned alarm clock marking it as 7:30 in the morning. He sighed as he looked at it and willed a hand of shadow to press the snooze on the infernal device. Why did morning have to come so soon? He grumbled before he tried to get up. Keyword, tried. He glanced down to see 2 heads of brown hair on his chest, one tipped with pinks and purples while the other was a full, darker tone. He smiled as he leaned down and kissed each head before slowly sitting up while ignoring the whines of protest. He almost chuckled as one head reared up to pout at him, a pair of goldish hazel eyes locking onto his orbs of black flames. Morning, he nearly chirped before pecking her on the lips. That earned him a smile before she yawned as she threw her arms back and let the sheets fall off her. His eyes couldn't help but stray to her bosom, barely hidden by her snug shirt. The sight only got better as she slowly crawled off the bed while giving him a prime view of her panty-clad rear. He had to bite the inside of his lips to resist trying to cop a feel, so he turned his head the other direction while muttering. Rhea, you tease. She hummed as she glanced back at him before giggling innocently. Percy, What a naughty boy. Ogling your girlfriend while your sister is in bed with you, pervert. Percy started choking on air while his face did an impression of a golden tomato, all the while Rhea started to laugh at him. Percy was about to fire a retort, but then a tiny fist lightly hit his chest while its owner mumbled, "Too loud." The couple looked at the offended 5-year-old as she sat up from Percy's side, her purple and blue eyes looking at them with annoyance. "Did we have to get up?" she asked with her infamous puppy dog eyes. "Yes," both replied without looking at her eyes. They knew that if they looked they'd lose otherwise. Andromeda whined while stuffing her face back into a pillow and trying to throw the blankets on, but Rhea came up and pulled them away. "No, little missy. Today's a big day and you are not going to miss out on it when it's about you," Rhea said in a motherly tone as she picked up the child and headed to the bathroom, Percy watching in amusement as Andy gave a sigh of defeat. He never got tired of seeing how that pair interacted in these last couple of years. They'd bonded nearly as much as Percy was with his sister, though at times the relationships were a bit odd due to a surprising ability Andy discovered days after getting the blessings of Eros and Phanes. Since she was connected to pure love rather than the lustful version Aphrodite did to over the millennia, her abilities changed to reflect that. While Aphrodite would subconsciously alter her appearance to get the best chances of attracting who she wanted, Andromeda's appearance could change according to the types of love she felt or someone near her needed. With Percy and Rhea, she was usually in the form of a child, usually 5 to 8, and ended up getting treated like a daughter most of the time or turn into a teen and be their little sister. With Nyx and Tartarus she would look her actual age of 21 and be far more serious since it usually involved training. With Eros and Phanes she would go through just about every age of development to adjust and understand the types of love and how they affected her or those around her. One shocking discovery that Eros made was that thanks to Andromeda sneaking into Percy and Rhea's bed so often, during the night time in the mortal world sibling and motherly love would increase thanks to Percy and Rhea's connections to their domains. That alone made Eros and Phanes ecstatic that they chose Andromeda to be their heir, which she was going to become today. As for Percy, he was also focused on the thoughts of Rhea. 15 years of awesome dating with plenty of kissing, cuddling, and heavy petting. After all that time together, training and simply getting to know each other to the point neither kept a secret from each other, save for one, he could safely say that he loved her, and was pretty sure Andromeda knew since she always snickered at them and winked when Percy looked at her. Still, he hadn't been able to actually say it since there was one thing holding him back, and those were his thoughts on Hestia. His heart still yearned for her as well. It was the only thing he feared bringing up with Rhea, but he knew that he needed to tell her soon. For another time though, he thought as he got out of bed and quickly changed into his usual black leather jeans, muscle shirt, steel-toed boots, and hooded cloak of darkness. His blades in ring form on each index finger was his last piece before his attire was complete, and all he had left was to wait for Andromeda and Rhea. Why those two always prefer morning showers, I'll never know, he mused as he sat of his bed and looked around his joint room with Rhea. They'd move in together after 5 years of dating and the decor hadn't really changed much aside from Rhea choosing gold sheets rather than black and a vanity for her beside his desk and bookshelf. He waited around for another 20 minutes or so before both ladies stepped out of the bathroom fully dressed. Rhea had her knee-length black dress with golden trimming, a gold with green trimmed sash around her waist, Greek-styled sandals, and her hair pulled into a braid over one shoulder. In one word, Percy thought she was gorgeous without a speck of makeup on her face. Next to her was Andromeda, looking her actual age now. She stood almost as tall as Rhea at 5'8", with a voluptuous figure fitting of a demi-primordial of love, her long hair spilling over her shoulders and down to her mid-back in waves. She was dressed in a similar attire to him. She had on a long-sleeved red shirt with a black corset top over it making her bust look even bigger than it already is, black and purple plaid skirt that reached mid-thigh, and thigh-high, tartare steel-toed, high-heeled leather boots. All of it came together with a black cloak meant to mirror his coat of darkness, just not as cool. Good thing every male around here is either taken, interested in someone else, dead, or Tartarus, Percy thought, knowing his sister's looks could give immortals heart attacks. Thank chaos that her personality wasn't anything like Aphrodite. He shuddered at the thought. So, ready to go? He asked as he got up and gave Rhea a quick kiss. Yep, she chirped back as Andromeda snickered at them while walking out first. Percy took Rhea's hand as they followed after her. They made quick work of exiting the House of Night and entered a rather nice courtyard, as far as Tartarus can go anyways. It was decorated with obsidian statues of famous heroes and monsters alike, flowers made of shadows and ice courtesy of both Percy and Nyx's efforts, and a large, pure white oak tree in the center. Standing by the oak was Eros, Nyx, Phanes, and Tartarus as they watched Andromeda approach, her gait becoming nervous as she got closer. Once she stood before them and Percy and Rhea stood a bit to the side, they began, Andromeda Jackson, are you ready to become a primordial heir? They said in unison. Andromeda looked around before her eyes fell on Percy, looking for the last bit of courage needed to do this. He gave her a firm nod of support and she smiled back before she looked straight at the protogonoi before her. Yes, she said in a strong voice. Then begin, commanded Eros as he stood at the center of the protogonoi. Andromeda took a deep breath before speaking in a voice laced with power. I, Andromeda Xena Jackson, state my claim and right to being the heiress of Eros, primordial of love and attraction, and Phanes, primordial of desire and procreation. With her words completed, Andromeda glowed a bright pink and purple, making everyone have to look away for a moment. Once the glow died down they looked again to see Andromeda standing there with a faint glow coming off her skin. Though what was new was a purple glove with a pink gem over the wrist on her right hand. Most be her pure manifestation of power, Percy thought as he glanced at his own cloak that left trails of darkness wherever he walked. Impressive, Eros said, breaking the silence, as he walked around Andromeda while inspecting her. It truly seems that every new primordial that came from lesser origins gains greater strength and potential. True, Phanes added as he also looked her up and down. She almost feels as strong as us at our primes and she hasn't even claimed the domains for herself yet. Ah, thank you, Andromeda said while blushing thanks to the compliments. You're welcome, Nyx said as she glanced at Tartarus, and we have a surprise for you. Really? Andy asked excitedly to which Tartarus responded by bringing a wrapped package from under his cloak. He handed the gift to the hopping primordial heiress who eagerly started to tear the wrapping off. Soon her gift was revealed and she gasped at the sight while Percy whistled in appreciation. It was a pair of 2-foot knives, the one blade being purple while the other was pink with fine, nearly unnoticeable serrations running the length with a tartare and steel guard and leather grips. Andromeda looked at them in awe before giving a devilish smirk as she spun them in her hands like a true master of knives and short swords. Percy would know, he helped train her. Even Artemis, with her millennia of using knives, didn't compare to Andromeda now since Andy had spent the last 15 years brutally training to fight other intelligent, significantly stronger combatants rather than just chasing after monsters. Hell, his sister's reflexes were nearly on par with his and she was definitely as fast though he still won out in overall skill and strength. He had no worries now about her getting into a fight with an Olympian, or several for that matter. D.A. Chapter 17. Gathering the Fallen 2. Percy would know, he helped train her. Even Artemis, with her millennia of using knives, didn't compare to Andromeda now since Andy had spent the last 15 years brutally training to fight other intelligent, significantly stronger combatants rather than just chasing after monsters. Hell, his sister's reflexes were nearly on par with his and she was definitely as fast though he still won out in overall skill and strength. He had no worries now about her getting into a fight with an Olympian, or several for that matter. Andromeda then started doing several practiced maneuvers, the knives singing in her hands at her effortless movement. After a few moments Nyx clapped her hands to get her attention. As exciting as it is to see you playing with the blades, I believe there is more to show you, she said making Andy's eyes widen in excitement. Try bringing the butt ends together, Phanes suggested with a barely hidden smirk. Andromeda looked at him funny but did as he instructed. At their joining the grips seemed to fuse together as each blade grew to double the length while curving slightly. Then, a string of glowing purple energy appeared between the ends to form a completed bow. What? Andromeda shouted as she gawked at the new bow in her hands. You like it? Eros asked to which Andy nodded numbly. Good. Tartarus took one feather from Phanes and I for the blades and one hair from you to make the string before forging it with tartare and steel. Like Percy's sin and purgatory, only you or those you allow can wield your weapon which undoubtedly will become your symbol of power. Awesome. Andromeda squealed in delight, momentarily shifting into a kid again before returning to normal. Percy chuckled at his sister's enthusiasm before Eros cleared his throat to get her attention. Well, why don't I get showing you some perks of being connected to our domain? He asked to which she eagerly nodded. Eros smiled as he walked off to the side with Andromeda and Phanes in tow, Rhea being dragged along by Andy in her excitement. Percy stepped beside Nyx and Tartarus as he watched in amusement while Eros started to explain about how to feel out the domain and its focus. Then he felt Nyx poking him in the side to get his attention, a mischievous glimmer in her eyes. Hey Percy, she said a little too sweetly, I was wondering something. Yes? He asked suspiciously as he glanced around for any shadows moving oddly. Andromeda is really pretty, right? She asked randomly. Of course, he answered while wondering where she was going with this. And you want her to always be beside you, right? She continued on, making his eyes narrow. Okay, what's up? He finally asked, knowing that with Nyx it is always best to bite the bullet. Oh, nothing, it's just that I've noticed how close you two are, with her sneaking into your bed all the time with even Rhea accepting it, and all, she said as she played with her hair while smirking slyly at him. And you know us Greeks, me and Erebus, Orinus and Gaia, the dramatic duo currently in power, I was just wondering, Nyx trailed off with a suggestive wiggle of the eyebrows while glancing at Andromeda. Percy followed her line of sight before looking back and forth, his eyebrows furrowed in thought before they shot up and his eyes widened in realization. Nyx started to giggle in his face while Tartarus totally forgot he was listening and chuckled dryly with his red eyes glowing in amusement under his hood. Wow, wow, wow. He shouted while waving his hands in a, back it up, motion. Is my name Jaime Lannister? No. I love her, sure, but not like that. And what if she feels that way? Nyx asked with that damned smirk. We both know that her form shifts to the kind of love she feels when completely relaxed or asleep. If that was the case she'd wake up as an adult with me, he retorted while quelling his racing heart. Nyx nearly gave him a heart attack with her thoughts, damn it. Is she trying to kill her own heir before he can even claim the domains? True, Nyx conceded before she suddenly went, aha. While taping her fist into an open palm. What about Hestia? Are you going to talk to Rhea about it? She asked in a whisper. Percy gave her a troubled frown as he thought about it. Of course he wanted to tell her, but he was scared to see how she would react. Would she be angry? Disgust? Feel betrayed or cheated? He would do anything to spare her that kind of pain, but letting it linger would only hurt more in that end. He sighed as he mentally kicked himself to man up about it. He looked at Nyx with firm eyes before answering. I'll tell her after I get back. I do love her and she deserves to know. Nyx looked at him intently for a few tense seconds before a soft smile appeared on her face. You really have grown into a fine man, she said fondly while caressing his cheek. I know things will pan out as they should, no fates meddling in this time. Just trust her with the full truth and who knows, you might be in for a surprise. Thanks, he said softly as he leaned into her touch. He'd never really said it, but Nyx had become like his mother throughout the years he's spent with her. Tartarus and the other protogonoi like odd uncles and aunts. It was a family, a quirky one, but a family nonetheless. Good, now getting going while the night is young, she said as she got on her aloof commander, face on, making him chuckle. He nodded and was about to shadow out but stopped abruptly as he heard a sharp gasp. Him and Nyx snapped their heads to see Andromeda on her knees with Rhea kneeling beside her in worry. Percy and Nyx were by their side in an instant, scanning over Andromeda for any signs of injury, but nothing was wrong. However, Percy noticed that Andromeda was silently crying while staring at the ground. Andy? Percy asked softly as he tapped her shoulder. She gasped as she turned to look at him before launching herself at him and hugging onto his neck, shifting into a child form and crying all the while. Percy held her while looking at the others in confusion. He noticed that neither Eros nor Phanes looked surprised but rather, a sad and almost resigned expressions. What happened? He asked softly as he ran his hand through Andromeda's hair while Rhea rubbed soothing circles on her back. Eros sighed while running a hand through his hair. It's her connection to her domain. She tried it out for the first time, and obviously didn't like what she found. Where did she look? Percy asked, knowing that at first they could only focus on one area until their connection grew once they claimed their domains. His connection was already enough to get a general sense of the continental United States at night and in clear detail within a mile radius of his focus, or if he's actually in the mortal world. She picked New York, the area around the Empire State specifically, Phanes answered. Percy grimaced at the thought, getting an idea of just what love she found there. He looked down at his sister as she finally stopped crying but kept her head resting against his chest while sniffling slightly. Andy, are you okay? He asked gently, making her look up at him. Big brother, she said softly as she looked at him with her mesmerizing purple and blue eyes. It was horrible. So much lust mixed with broken love, betrayal, and hate. It was so vile, like swimming in Dracon intestines. Percy shuddered at the description. That happened to him once. Don't ask, Nyx could be a bitch of a trainer by the way. But the worst part was the focus of procreation and lust, completely devoid of actual love. Someone there was thinking of making more babies but not to love them like a parent. Just have them for trophies. Memories and proof of who she slept with. Her. Percy asked only for Eros to answer. Aphrodite, he spat in disgust. Percy growled at the name of the mentioned goddess. Of course it had to be her, who else? In his years here several of the protogonoi had explained to him what they'd seen that made them come together to decide on finding heirs and moving on. Their disgust with the ruling gods and the state of the world had finally proven too much for them to truly remain on the sidelines, yet they knew their time was past. It was up to the next generation to fix the wrongs, and Eros had explained in detail just what Aphrodite had truly thought of his love with the spawn of Athena. Turns out while his was genuine, Aphrodite had pushed Annabeth's friendship beyond platonic forms to amuse herself and also get back at Athena for being a maiden goddess. Of course that had changed when he proved to be such a hero that she herself had begun to want him. To claim him. He had become a prized buck in her hunting game, and keeping Annabeth interested would have only gotten in the way, so she stopped meddling and allowed Annabeth's true emotions out, not that they were any better than the fake ones. Turns out the blonde girl he'd met when he first arrived, the one who saw herself as above others thanks to her wisdom, who sought the attentions of those in the spotlight such as Luke had been as the best swordsman at the time, were her real, romantic, ambitions. He even learned who had helped her relieve the stress when she was desperate to find him. He knew seeing Apollo looking so happy at her godhood had been odd. Well, another reason to toss said god into the deepest pit of darkness he could create. Still, his thoughts returned to Aphrodite and how she seemed to only care about the children that did something noteworthy, otherwise she cared nothing for them. Piper had become her golden girl while the rest of her cabin laid forgotten. Hell, the worst bullies of Aphrodite's cabin had always been their own siblings, with how, unless they learn to break a heart, they aren't worthy to be her children, and such. Piper had brought out a loving, nearly forgotten self of the goddess, but she was only one daughter and it was only a matter of time before Aphrodite returned to her ways, and it looks like it happened recently judging by how Andromeda reacted to her presence. It's like every Olympian is personally giving me a reason to skin them alive in particular, he thought as he looked at his sister's face and grew worried. Before she'd looked shocked and scared, but now, there was only anger and disgust. He didn't resist as she pulled out of his arms and stood up, shifting into her adult form as she looked at Phanes and Eros. Am I powerful enough to curse someone like an Olympian? She asked in a cold tone. Yes, Eros replied without hesitation. But you lack experience, so I would have to focus it for you. Andromeda nodded before taking a deep breath and speaking in a voice laced with power. I, Andromeda Xena Jackson, curse Aphrodite to an eternity of sterility. May her womb become barren, her breasts forever dry, her ability to give new life in any form stripped, till the day she is nothing more than dust and ash. A loud thunder crack sealed her curse as her body flashed with power. Percy looked in awe at his sister, marveling at what she just did to the goddess of love. To take away one of the key known aspects of that goddess, it was brutal. Percy was sure that it would drive the goddess insane, and the only worse would have been taking her ability to have sex. Could his sister actually do that? It seemed that Nyx had the same curiosity. Hey, why didn't you just forbid her from having sex or something? She asked while tapping her chin. Andromeda looked at her silently for a moment before answering, I don't care about how much she sleeps around, I just won't allow new lives to be used like that. I could have taken away all her physical desires, leaving her like a stone slab, but that could get the Olympians too curious about how it happened. It should be a year or two before anyone notices something fishy. Now I know where most of their mother's brains went, Nyx said with a smirk while glancing at Percy. Hey! He shouted indignantly, much to her amusement. I'm plenty smart. Yeah, after years of me teaching you to think on your feet and plan ahead, and even then sometimes you rush in, guns blazing, Nyx chuckled back. All Percy could do was pout at her, getting a giggled from not only Nyx but Rhea and Andromeda, while Eros and Phanes chuckled at him. No support whatsoever, he grumbled for a few moments before he sighed as he looked at the group. As much fun as horsing around like this is, I do believe I had a mission. D.A. Chapter 18. Gathering the Fallen 3. All Percy could do was pout at her, getting a giggled from not only Nyx but Rhea and Andromeda, while Eros and Phanes chuckled at him. No support whatsoever, he grumbled for a few moments before he sighed as he looked at the group. As much fun as horsing around like this is, I do believe I had a mission. That got the group sober quick as they looked at him. This mission's importance could not be understated, as it could become the basis for some of their biggest possible allies. Sure, Percy would have preferred fighting this entire war himself, but even once he becomes a full primordial, he was still one man. He might be able to win in the end, but only after decades, possibly centuries of battle against the Olympians and their hundreds of allies. He would need his own forces, and it was time to start gaining some. Be safe, Percy, Andromeda murmured as she hugged him quickly. Rhea soon followed up with a kiss before pressing their foreheads together and whispering, "Come back in one piece." "Hey, it's me we're talking about here," he replied with a smirk. "It's not like I'm going to start a war right now." "Exactly," several voices answered him, making him deadpan. "Love the vote of confidence," he replied before pecking Rhea one more time and then, seamlessly dissolved into shadows as he left Tartarus. "I wonder if flashing will be any different to my shadow traveling," he mused for the second or so it took him to leave Tartarus and arrive in the mortal world. He looked around his arrival, Mount Tamalpais, and noted the entrance to a certain garden. He smirked as he pulled his hood up, completely hiding his features aside from his chin and the glow of his eyes within the shadows. He closed up his coat as well, keeping even his body hidden, and with the current night and shadows slowly seeping off him, he looked like a shade as he nearly glided along the ground. His movement was soundless as he entered the Garden of Hesperides with a familiar tree and dragon in sight. He doesn't even bother giving it a second glance but soon stops as four girls materialize before them. "Who are you?" one asked as they look him up and down. "Just someone passing by," he answers in a deepened voice. "To try and steal an apple, no doubt," a second one said with narrowed eyes. "No need," he retorted while subtly turning one finger in a shadowed claw and pricking another finer with it before bringing the finger up to show the ichor. "I simply wish to speak with someone." "And how do we know this isn't some sort of trick?" a third asked before the fourth continued. "We should report an unknown immortal to Olympus." "Sorry," he said with a faint smile, "but I can't let you do that." "Wah." She never got to finish her sentence as Percy rushed forward, driving a sucker punch into her gut. She coughed while doubling over before her eyes rolled in the back of her head and she slumped to the ground. Before the other Hesperides could react, he continued his attacks with practiced precision. A sharp jab to the head of the second, before he flipped while driving his heel against the temple of the fourth. When he landed, he dashed to the third, got behind her and grabbed her into a chokehold, specifically limiting her blood flow to her head. She struggled in vain for several seconds, but with the lack of air and proper blood movement, soon blacked out in his arms. He set her down beside her sisters, chuckling softly before murmuring, "Mnemosyne, if you would." At his words, a soft white glow surrounded the heads of the Hesperides, wiping their memories of encountering him. "Done." A peppy voice chirped in his head, making him smile. Now that was one happy Titaness. It was no wonder that she was one of Ray's favorite little sisters. When Mnemosyne and Andromeda got together, the atmosphere was so overly positive that Percy sometimes looked for Tartarus and tried asking him for jokes. Nothing was more depressing than his uncle's sense of humor, and it was the perfect balance to his sister's antics. He shook his head at the thoughts before he continued on his way, easily making it past Layton since they'd been too far for the dragon to properly hear without there being an explicit call for his name, and Percy kept some distance from the tree just to be sure. He soon made his way up to the top of the mountain, taking in the sights, though they weren't really much to begin with. At one point he looked in the direction that he knew Camp Jupiter was and wondered how some of his old friends were. Jason, Piper, Frank, and Hazel had stayed there, but with his disappearance, he hadn't really thought to check on them. He knew they were strong, so he wasn't worried about them in that sense, but he was just more curious to see how their lives were going. He thought finally paying a visit sometime after he finished the mission, though he wouldn't be able to greet them, not yet anyways. But if I made them choose, who would they side with in the war? He wondered as he continued to walk. They were his friends and fought with him, sure, but at the same time three were loyal Romans and Piper probably wouldn't do anything without Jason. Reyna was a most likely no as well, but he could hope. Thoughts for later then, he mused as he arrived at his true destination. He stood a few meters away from the person he sought out, Atlas, Titan of strength and endurance. He stood at a hulking 8 feet, body packed with dense muscle and lightly tanned skin. His hair was a yellowish blonde from the constant sun and his beard had grown shaggy from lack of care, his arms held up to lift the skies. Percy observed the monument meant to serve as the powerful Titan's punishment with distaste. Many forget that the sky and earth were not originally meant to be connected like this, but was done by the Olympians with the help of the elder Cyclops. With the banishment of Hyperion, Iapetus, Krios, and Koios, the Titan lords of the north, south, east, and west, the sky was naturally destabilized and so, this meeting point was formed to keep Atlas imprisoned, but Percy needed to destroy it. Balance needed to be restored, and adding Atlas to his ally side was a big plus if he managed it. It brought a bitter taste to his mouth, helping him when it was thanks to him that Zoe died, but then again, Percy had a plan for that as well. So, with that in mind, he walked up to the weary Titan and made himself known by clearing his throat. Atlas lifted his head up slowly to look at him, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. Atlas, Percy began as he walked closer. Who are you? Atlas asked in a tired voice as he shifted his shoulders slightly. One who has come with a deal, he answered, not wanting the Titan to know his identity for now. A deal? Atlas echoed with a bitter tone. And what sort of deal could you offer me, mortal? Percy chuckled at the Titan, thinking he was mortal. He really needed to thank Nyx for giving him the charm to hide his presence, though it wouldn't work anymore once he ascended to being a full primordial. I offer freedom from your burden, he said, watching the Titan's reactions. How? Atlas asked slowly as he looked him up and down. You can't take the burden yourself without dying, so what would be the point? And I doubt you have another god in reserve somewhere looking for a workout, he added with a scoff. Oh, I do plan on taking your burden, just not at this moment, he answered, getting a surprised look from Atlas. Just, who are you? Atlas asked suspiciously. Someone who will see Olympus fall, he answered darkly, his eyes glowing in agreement. Atlas chuckled at his claim before saying, many have made that claim. What makes yours any different? Oh, I don't know, he said with a shrug as the darkness and shadows around him started to writhe and move like hungry claws as frost spread from his feet, a modicum of his power and killing intent aimed directly towards the Titan. With satisfaction he noted that Atlas shivered slightly with a new unease in his stony gray eyes. Just, trust me on this, he said as he reined his power in. I will swear on the sticks to take your burden from you if you swear to follow the next order I give you to the letter once I free you. Deal. Atlas looked at him silently for some time, keeping his thoughts rather well hidden with a poker face and blank eyes. After nearly 5 minutes passed, Atlas sighed as he nodded. Very well, I swear on the river Styx too. Aha, Percy interrupted with a raised hand. Swear on the Styx, and your immortality. D.A. Chapter 19, Gathering the Fallen IV. Atlas looked at him silently for some time, keeping his thoughts rather well hidden with a poker face and blank eyes. After nearly 5 minutes passed, Atlas sighed as he nodded. Very well, I swear on the river Styx too. Aha, Percy interrupted with a raised hand. Swear on the Styx, and your immortality. Atlas, eyes nearly shot past the crown of his own head as he looked at Percy incredulously. Percy just shrugged before saying, got to make sure you don't go back on your word in any way. Atlas grit his teeth while looking at him before he nodded tersely. One order, that's it. Yep, one order from me, Percy replied easily. Fine, I swear to your terms, Atlas said, and a thunder crack sealed his oath. Then I swear on the Styx to return and free you from your burden when the time is right, Percy replied with another thunder crack. Well, better get going, lots of people to visit after all. He didn't wait for Atlas to answer before he dissolved into shadows again. He appeared in a dense forest near the borders of Canada on the state side in North Dakota. He sensed around him for the presence he hunted down several days ago but was surprised to find two this time, and conveniently both were people he was looking for. Now this night is just getting better and better, he thought as he walked towards them. It didn't take him long to arrive at a clearing, just outside the light of a campfire, to see two very particular women. One wore a shawl to cover her hair and large sunglasses even in the middle of the night to hide her eyes, dressed in white dress that just reached her knees. Her frame was petite small, her form slouched over as she stared at the flames while speaking in hushed whispers with her companion. The other woman, or more like monstrous woman, had the lower body of a large, black scale serpent just below her hips. She had raven hair spilling over her shoulders, and from Percy's view, he could see her bright blue eyes looking at the fire sadly as well. Her upper body was dressed in a tank top with a small jacket over it, a small bow and quiver strapped to her back. Just who I was looking for, Medusa and Lamia, he thought as he stepped close enough for both to notice him. With speed faster than most mortals could hope to move or react, both were up, their backs to the fire, and Lamia had an arrow trained at him. Who are you? Lamia hissed as she looked him up and down while Medusa kept one hand to her shades, ready to take them off in a moment's notice. A friend, he answered while wondering if Medusa would remember him and how he took her head last time. Maybe apologizing about that could help. Or maybe he could offer her a child of Athena to torture. Hell, he could probably get her the Athena if he played his cards right. A friend you say, Medusa muttered as she watched him intently. What are you? You smell like a demigod, only, different. True, Lamia agreed with narrowing eyes, I can't place the scent either. I assure you I mean you no harm and you can trust me, he tried as he raised his hands to show he was unarmed, at the moment. Then show us your face, Medusa said. You first, he shot back making them both start in surprise. Why you do realize who I am, don't you? Medusa asked while pointing a finger at herself. Yes, he answered as if it wasn't a big deal. Medusa and Lamia glanced at each other before Lamia shrugged while muttering, your funeral. Medusa then removed her shawl and shades to reveal a face that Percy honestly found beautiful. Her coppery skin gleamed with the campfire behind her, her emerald green eyes glowed while her narrowed pupils gave her a semi-feral air. As Percy stared into her eyes he felt the curse trying to affect him and it honestly hurt. Sure, her curse was powerful but not absolute, otherwise all she had to do was chance a glance with an Olympian and she would be their end. Athena wasn't stupid enough to give her that sort of power and in truth, any curse given by an immortal can only be as powerful as something below the immortal in question. In other words, if Athena had given Medusa's curse the strongest potential, at best Medusa would have been a threat to anything of minor god power or lower, monsters included. Thanks to already having enough power to outdo several Olympians or Titans, the curse was only a painful annoyance at best. He felt like he'd been exercising for days without stopping while his muscles strained and at the same time he was moving through molasses. Damn, now this is a curse. Got to give Lady Wisdom credit where credit is due, he thought as he kept a grimace from his face. Medusa and Lamia were looking at him in shock, having expected for him to turn to stone but obviously wasn't. Lamia had to also awkwardly keep her right shoulder up to avoid accidentally looking at Medusa. Seeing that Percy decided it was best to get her shades back on and get talking to the two. He willed a tendril of shadow to gently pick up the shades, which Medusa dropped in her shock, and brought it to her face. She looked at it dumbly before taking them and putting them on. Now can we talk? He asked before glancing at the fire behind them. Sure, Lamia said as she slowly lowered her bow and put the arrow away. One quick thing, he said and formed a wave of darkness that overlapped and snuffed out the fire without so much as a hiss, much to the two ladies' surprise. Only some moonlight illuminated them now, much to Percy's distaste. Now then, I have an offer for the both of you. And what would that be? Medusa asked as she glanced at Lamia beside her, as if looking for reassurance considering her usual ace in the hole wasn't going to help her here. Freedom from your curses, Percy started as the two gasped at the thought, and revenge for your suffering. That's an empty promise, Lamia said bitterly. Not even the Titans offered that during their little war. What makes you any different? Well, for one I keep my promises, he retorted while crossing his arms. And I'm not in any hurry. I can afford to use the energy necessary to free you both and even offer you a chance to get your revenge for the injustice of the gods. Lamia and Medusa remained silent as they looked down while biting their lips. Percy knew that they were on the fence with this. They could say no and remain cursed forever, left as monsters that would be hunted by demigods, or they could side with him in the hopes of being free. Knowing that they were close to agreeing, Percy gave them that final push. Medusa, you were once one of wisdom's most dedicated followers and a beauty beyond most mortals. That beauty led to the ever lecherous sea god to forcing himself on you, after you rejected him, in your mistress' temple. What did your devotion get you? You were cast aside and cursed for something you didn't do, and in her pride, she hasn't removed her curse or apologized for unjust punishment. Do you truly want to remain like this forever? At his words he could see some tears running down Medusa's cheeks as she hugged herself, probably recalling that very event. How he cursed the god he once called father as he looked at this. So many of the monsters demigods feared now were created by the Olympians and both made to suffer while the gods watched on. He then turned his attention to Lamia. And you, Lamia, once a lover of the drama queen. You bore him children and his wife, in her jealousy, slaughtered them herself before cursing you while your lover remained silent about it. She knew you were a caring mother that adorned children, so what better way to get to you than making you a child-eating monster? Isn't it time that she paid for this? That is what I offer both of you. Revenge, but most importantly, freedom from your curses and the power to choose how you'll live the rest of your lives. By now both were openly crying as they looked at him. He didn't need to see Medusa's eyes to know what was in them. The hurt and pain of betrayal, abandonment, and feeling powerless. turned into the very abominations they once hated, and all for the petty jealousy and grudges of the gods. He sighed as he slowly approached them before resting a comforting hand on each of their heads, much to their surprise. I think you've both suffered enough, he said softly. So please, give yourselves a chance, he said as they continued to cry harder. In the heat of the moment, Percy pulled them both into a light hug, both going rigid for a moment before relaxing in his embrace. Andy was right, he thought as he looked at the two as they continued to cry. His sister had visited the mortal world occasionally with Rhea and with her domains, had been able to find those whose hearts were in the most pain. She pointed both of these two out after a chance glimpse of them when they were running from being hunted by a band of demigods a year or so back. In the momentary close vicinity, she'd almost fallen over at the overwhelming pain held within them. She'd then come straight to him and Nyx and asked if there was any way to help them, much to Percy's surprise. In the end, he'd told her he'd give it a try. And now here he was with both, comforting them for the first time after millennia of suffering alone, with the occasional support from each other due to the similarity of their pains. He waited as both stopped crying before pulling back and looking at them intently. So, does this mean that you'll join me? He asked softly. Both nodded and Percy smiled before removing his hood so they could see his face. It took a moment before Medusa gasped as she recognized him, but Percy placed a finger to her lips to silence her. I know, I have a lot to explain, but for now, I'll send you somewhere safe, he said as he stepped back and started to gather shadows around them. Mind you, this will feel odd the first time, but don't worry, Nyx will explain a few things. Both had their mouths open in shock at the name of the night goddess, but he didn't give them time to respond as the shadows enveloped them, sending them straight to the House of Night. He sighed once they were gone, his body still feeling heavy from the remains of Medusa's curse. He wanted to take a nap but still had a visit or two left. Oh well, Gibraltar, here I come. And with that, he dissolved into shadows as well. D.A. Chapter 20, The Fallen Eye. An hour after Percy left. Andy. You okay? Yeah, why wouldn't I be? Andromeda asked as she stopped staring off into the fields of Tartarus. Rhea looked at the currently little girl in worry. After the episode with detecting her domain and finding Aphrodite, Andromeda had kept a constant blank face and seemed to space out constantly. Rhea was pretty sure that Andromeda was currently monitoring the love goddess, possibly in thinking if and how to pass judgment on her. Even after these years, Andromeda hadn't been vocal about punishing the gods. She wanted their rule to be over, that was clear, but whether she had a hand in their punishments after all was said and done was up in the air. Personally, Rhea would be more than happy if Andromeda kept her hands clean of Olympian ichor after the war. She was simply too sweet and kind to be brought into the torture of the Olympians regardless of how much right she had to after what they did to her family. Percy agreed wholeheartedly with Rhea, but he also said that if she made the choice to participate, he wouldn't stop her either. Looking at Andromeda now, Rhea couldn't shake the feeling that she was starting to consider to just that with Aphrodite. Deciding to voice her thoughts, Rhea began, "Are you looking into Aphrodite?" Andy frowned for a moment before slowly nodding. "It's just that, when I felt how she is, it's like I need to constantly watch her to make sure she doesn't continue with her ways, but I can't really do anything yet, can I?" "No," Rhea answered while shaking her head. "For now you must stay hidden." Andy huffed in frustration before frowning at her lap. After a few moments she looked at Rhea with a critical eye, making Rhea begin to feel slightly uncomfortable. "Hey Rhea, Andy muttered softly. "Yes, what is it?" Rhea asked as she leaned forward curiously. Just forget it," Andy replied, but now Rhea was too curious to let it up. "Naha, there's something on your mind, so tell me," she persisted while narrowing her eyes at Andy. "It's nothing, really," Andy shot back. "You're a terrible liar," Rhea said with a faint smirk before becoming more serious. "Now tell me what's on your mind." Andromeda bit her lip as she looked anywhere but Rhea's face for a few minutes. She then glanced nervously at Rhea before asking shyly, "You love my brother, right?" Rhea looked at her in slight surprise before blushing slightly while answering, "Of course I do." Neither had really said it yet though. She knew Percy was still sensitive to that word after everything that happened with the cheater and Aphrodite's meddling. Heck, his luck with romances have really sucked considering his first crush and girlfriendish relation with Rachel ended because of her being the next oracle and all that, then the odd episodes with Calypso and later on Reina. Rhea was also shy about saying it to him due to her past with her siblings. She hadn't loved Kronos, but it was her mother's request that the two be together and she truly had tried to love him, but it just never happened. Afterwards she was alone when her children won the war and she thought she was destined to remain there for all eternity, never loving or loved. Then suddenly she meets one raven hair man who that damned smirk, and a spark she thought would remain dead forever suddenly grew into a flame. It all started with simple companionship and training, then they became close friends until they were the closest friends could be. They trusted each other in any situation and would always be there for the other. How could she not fall in love with him? Now if only she could work the courage to actually tell him. That's good, Andromeda said sweetly before adding with a smirk, and I would love to call you, big sister, officially. Andy. Rhea shouted in surprise while her face went golden while her heart raced away. What? Andy asked innocently while shrugging. It's true and, I know he feels the same. He does. Rhea whispered softly as she looked at Andy in the eyes. Are you sure? Did Percy truly return her love? Had he finally healed enough to love her the same way she did him? Yeah, but, Andy continued and Rhea felt her heart drop at the, but. Was there something wrong that kept him from being with her? At her look Andromeda took a deep breath before continuing. Percy's a klutz, right? Huh? Rhea asked, completely caught off guard by the sudden change in the conversation. Percy, Andromeda continued, he is a big, lovable, silly klutz, right? Yeah, Rhea said with a tiny sigh as she looked down. But I still love him. I know you do, that's why I'm going to tell you this, otherwise when he does tell you he'll mess it up somehow. I don't really feel like watching you two go in a back and forth just because of a misunderstanding, so I'll be frank, but don't let him know I told you, she said seriously, making Rhea nod firmly. Andromeda took a deep breath before continuing. Percy does love you, truly, but you aren't the only one. What do you mean? Rhea asked nervously as she fidgeted with the hem of her dress. What I mean is, Percy was starting to fall for someone else before he came to Tartarus and then met you. Now he holds you and that significant other in his heart, but he's scared to tell you, she answered. Why would he be scared? Rhea asked softly as she looked at Andromeda. Because he's scared to lose you if you don't take it well. He also doesn't want to hurt you in any way or make it look like he betrayed you. In fact, I'm pretty sure if you made him, he'd choose you since you're together right now, but I can also guarantee that he wouldn't truly be happy. Rhea stayed silent as she looked at the girl she considered a little sister for some time, her thoughts focused on Percy and the new information she had. So he loved her, but another as well. Who was it? She couldn't recall Percy talking about anyone particular during their years, but then again, aside from his adventures, she'd never asked that particular question and didn't think he'd want to touch on romance at the time. Not to mention it would have been awkward when they were dating too. Still, how did that make her feel? A little hurt maybe. Yes, but at the same time she knew he did love her and would never hide something like a relationship on the side from her. Percy could never willingly hurt those he cares for, and if he did love someone else as well, then they couldn't be bad, right? She was brought out of her thoughts when Andromeda poked her before speaking up. So, what will you do? She asked nervously. Rhea gave her a reassuring smile before answering, I'm going to take a walk and think about it. That answer didn't seem to settle Andromeda at all, but before she could add anything Rhea continued while raising a hand. I didn't say I was angry or am going to break with him. Heavens no. He hasn't done anything wrong and I could never hurt him like that either. I just want a little time to myself before talking to him next time I see him. If he truly feels that way, then we're going to need to discuss it like a couple. Andromeda sighed in relief at her words, giving her a faint smile before hugging her close. That's great to hear, and I'm sure everything will work out right in the end. Rhea smiled at her words before both left the embrace and got up. Rhea was about to turn away to begin her walk when Andy cleared her throat to get her attention. Yes? Rhea asked while half turning to look at her. Mind if I borrow the necklace Nyx gave you for your visits to the mortal world? Why? Rhea asked with a tilt of the head. I want to check something, Andy answered cryptically. Andromeda, Rhea said as she fully turned around and crossing her arms under her impressive bust while giving the girl a critical eye. What are you planning that needs you going to the mortal world? Andromeda bit her lip for a moment before replying, I want to see them. Who? Rhea asked with narrowing eyes. Percy's friends. The ones that he had to leave behind. I just want to check up then for him since, well you know, it's hard for him since he can't really interact with them yet and all that. It's too dangerous, was Ray's immediate answer. No way in hell she was going to let Andromeda go back to the mortal world alone and risk capture and torture or worse at the hands of the Olympians. No, it isn't. Andromeda snapped back with irritation lacing her voice as she shifted to her adult form. I can take on any god that might be there and I'm only going to Camp Jupiter. Plus it's night time right now and with Nyx's necklace, I'll practically be invisible power-wise. Only someone like a primordial or you and Percy would be able to detect me past the charmed necklace. Rhea knew she was right but still, the thought of Andromeda getting hurt or worse terrified her. Still, she could see it in Andromeda's eyes that she would just find another way to go if Rhea said no. The Jackson siblings, never had there been such mule-headed kids before. At least with the necklace she could be assured that Andromeda was hidden and had a means of escape. They stared off for nearly a minute before Rhea sighed while running a hand through her hair. Fine, Rhea finally said and raised a hand before Andy could celebrate, but you need to be back before dawn at the latest. And if something goes wrong, pray immediately to Nyx or me or any others who can receive prayers. We'll come in even if it means tearing apart an Olympian or two. Am I understood? Crystal, Andy said with a nod before Rhea reached her dress and pulled out an obsidian amulet. She handed it to Andy who quickly put it on before focusing on it. With a glow of power her hair and eyes became midnight black while her godly aura suppressed to the level of a minor demigod at best. With that she gave Nyx another nod before she closed her eyes and dissolved into the shadows. Rhea sighed as she watched her go before muttering, I hope I made the right choice. D.A. Chapter 21, The Fallen 2. With a glow of power her hair and eyes became midnight black while her godly aura suppressed to the level of a minor demigod at best. With that she gave Nyx another nod before she closed her eyes and dissolved into the shadows. Rhea sighed as she watched her go before muttering, I hope I made the right choice. Percy stepped out of the shadow of a palm tree as he took in the sights. He remembered the last time he was here, on the island between Gibraltar and the gate to the Mare Nostrum. The beach was quiet and clean, a gentle breeze passing by. Dawn had come recently and the last dregs of shadows were fading, making Percy feel even more sore thanks to the remains of Medusa's curse. He rolled his shoulders as he walked along the fine sand, his hood up to keep his identity a secret. Now where is he? He mused before spotting the subject of his search. There, down near the lapping waters of the beach stood Hercules. His dirty blonde hair and trimmed beard waved in the breeze while his electric blue eyes remained cloudy from thought. Dressed in Bermuda trunks, open beach shirt, and his iconic club impaled in the sand at his side. Percy could tell that he was looking out at the sea morosely, a soft sigh escaping him as Percy approached near soundlessly. Okay, how to do this? He thought awkwardly before he cleared his throat to get his attention. At the sound Hercules wheeled around to look at him in surprise before he grabbed his club in reflex and leveled a glare at Percy. Who are you, stranger? He asked while taking a defensive stance. Someone who wants to talk, Percy replied while raising his hands to seem less threatening. About what? Hercules asked suspiciously without taking a step. And how did you get here in fact? You feel like a demigod and yet I didn't see a vessel or even detect your presence on arrival. I shadow traveled and maybe my power was too low for you to bother, Percy replied with a shrug. A very likely story, Hercules retorted while watching him closely. Tell me, why shouldn't I beat you to an inch of your life and drag you back to Olympus? Wouldn't that require you being able to leave this island? Percy shot back with a tiny smirk. You're no better than Calypso with this island. The gatekeeper of Olympus, how grand, Percy drawled while crossing his arms. Hercules started to turn a golden shade with anger before gritting out, are you trying to die? No, however, Percy said with a raised finger, how about this? We'll fight. No powers or weapons. Just a good old fist to fist. If you win, I'll remain while you summon the Olympians. If I win, you need to do one request for me. Afterwards, you're free to do as you wish, or whatever it is you even can do on this island. Hercules studied him intently for a few moments before snorting, fine. He then tossed his club aside, stripped his shirt to reveal his overly large muscle. Percy scoffed at the failed attempt to intimidate him before he uncrossed his arms and stood at the ready. They looked at each other for a few moments before Hercules suddenly ran forward. Percy watched as Hercules closed in and sent a haymaker, but he ducked right under it as Hercules stumbled past him. He then waited as Hercules returned with growing anger, making jabs and grabs, but Percy was a weasel. He weaved in and out of Hercules, grasped with bored ease, even going as far as to tuck his hands into his jean pockets while his eyes glowed in amusement underneath his hood. Occasionally he would throw a returning jab, nailing Hercules in the nose, the kidney, the sternum, and the temple. Hercules shrugged most off, but Percy could see that the damage was slowly building. Hercules was getting sloppier, sometimes stumbling whenever Percy got a good hit at his face, and his posture was starting to slump while Percy looked as fresh as a spring daisy. He smirked a little before deciding to throw a taunt after Hercules missed a punch by a wide margin. Come on. I came all the way to see you here. Make it worthwhile, Percy goaded, making Hercules turn golden even more as went for a wild tackle. Percy chuckled as he jumped and used his hand to vault over the moving tower of muscle, smacking the back of his head all the while. Olé! Percy shouted with a mock bow, making Hercules roar in rage as he charged again. His time Percy gave him a smirk that some would call sinister as he caught each of Hercules' hands in his own while grounding his feet into the sand below him. The momentum of the charge pushed him back though, his feet leaving deep trenches in the beach until Hercules slowed to a stop with his hands still locked with Percy's. My turn, Percy snickered before applying full force to his hands, bending Hercules' fingers back as he released a pained grunt. Hercules may have been strong by godly standards, but when compared to the likes of Tartarus and even Nyx, well, he wasn't anything special. Knowing that, Percy kept the pressure until Hercules dropped to one knee. Once there, Percy raised his knee and smashed it into Hercules' face. A satisfying crunch marked the recently broken nose as Hercules groaned, but Percy wasn't done yet. He then turned around as he pulled Hercules along before slamming the god of strength straight into the beach. The impact formed a deep crater while making the whole island shake slightly as dust and sand billowed around them. Percy then finally released his grip on Hercules and stood straight, marveling at the still conscious god even as he moaned in pain. Well, at least he can definitely take a hit, Percy mused as he stepped around the hulking man before setting his foot near Hercules' throat. Yield? Percy asked calmly while looking down at the bested god. Hercules looked at him past some ichor that had fallen into his eyes from the pretty little cut he got on his head before nodding slowly. All right then, Percy clapped enthusiastically. Then my request is this, I want to hear your story. What? Hercules asked in confusion as he slowly sat up while gingerly touching his forehead. You heard me, Percy replied while plopping down beside the god. But I'm sure you know. I don't mean the Hercules, great hero who completed the 12 labors. I mean the man that lived as a hero before it all happened. Before the murder of his family after a vengeful goddess cursed him with madness, before his life was turned into a living hell of betrayal and manipulation only to then be cast aside. I want to know the man who once wore the name Heracles with pride and was the true hero demigods should strive to be, Percy said seriously while looking intently at the shocked god. Hercules openly gaped at him, his eyes showing his disbelief at the request. Percy for his part kept his expression as serious as possible. Even though he found the face Hercules was making hilarious, he didn't want the god to think that he was making fun of him in this request. They remained silent for some time until Hercules sighed while running a hand through his disheveled hair. I don't think anyone has ever asked about that before, he muttered as he looked out at the beach and sea beyond. Well, them that makes me special is the first, Percy replied before grinning. I'll even sweeten the deal and show you who I am after you finish. Sound good? Hercules glanced at him before smirking. Yeah, that'll do. So, Percy intoned with a rolling hand. Where to begin? Hercules said while looking up at the sky. I guess that it all started when I was just a boy. Everyone knows about those serpents she sent after me when I was but a baby. After that failed attempt, I think I was left alone with my mother, Alcmene, well into my early childhood. I remember meeting father for the first time, but it was brief and I didn't really connect him with the king of the gods until later on. I grew up like any other boy at the time. Loud, energetic, getting into trouble at every turn and generally driving mother crazy, but I did have a sort of father figure at those times. Hercules paused as he glanced at his hands sadly. I never really did appreciate him enough. A wise old hunter he was by the name of Garrick. Mother didn't let herself get involved with any men in case of father's wrath, but Garrick was old and wasn't interested himself, so it wasn't a worry for him to visit often, Hercules told with a hint of nostalgia in his voice. Taught me to hunt and shoot, gave me a whooping once or twice when I was getting big-headed, he knew I was stronger but I respected him too much to do anything and I usually deserved it anyways. But, when I was around 12, I remember father visiting again to see how I was doing. Hercules paused as he grimaced slightly. He didn't like the sound of anyone being around me that could fill my head with dangerous ideas, as he put it. Turns out when a man teaches you to have humility and offer your services to those in need is dangerous by Olympian standards. I didn't realize it then, but suddenly Garrick wasn't around anymore. And then the first monsters came when I learned the truth of who my father really was, then the monsters started to attack in force. Hercules glanced at Percy, his jaws tight as he continued on. I fought my first hellhound. Smashed the thing under a cart. Soon more came and I got battle-hardened fast. Used my bow a fair amount too, and it went like that for several years. By then I developed a small reputation as a monster slayer but also a helper. Logging, hunting, building, anything that could put my strength and hard-learned skills to good use. Was glory not your goal though? Percy asked with a raised eyebrow, not that Hercules could see it. HMPH, at the time, no, Hercules answered. In truth I was rather happy with the peace and quiet, granted with the monsters it wasn't necessarily boring either. I just wanted my village and mother to be safe after all. It was my home and practically raised me while my father was probably off knocking up other women. Hercules practically spat the last sentence. He visited from time to time, usually before I would offer my services for work. He would go on how it was beneath me and all that, but I never saw anything wrong with it. Garrick taught me the joy and self-satisfaction of a hard day's work. I was proud of the things I helped build and protect. Makes me wish this part had been in your legend, Percy murmured as he looked critically at Hercules. Ha! Hercules boomed as he clapped Percy on the shoulder. Well, what could you expect? Mortals are always drawn to the bigger and shinier tales and usually forget the humble beginnings. The only reason anyone knows part of my birth was thanks to those damned snakes. But yes, it is a pity. Hercules then sighed again as he looked at the sea. Of course after some years I met her. Her? Percy asked as he leaned closer curiously. Yes, her, Hercules murmured with a pained glint in his eyes. My wife. And her name was? Percy asked. I can't remember it, he answered. Why? Percy asked with a frown. You know what I did, Hercules replied as he looked at Percy. I murdered her and our children. But you were cursed, Percy countered. Then I should have been stronger. Hercules snapped back before taking a deep breath. I should have been stronger, but in the end I was made a puppet. So, for my crime, I forced myself to forget her and my children's names. I don't deserve to even utter them. D.A. Chapter 22, The Fallen 3. You know what I did, Hercules replied as he looked at Percy. I murdered her and our children. But you were cursed, Percy countered. Then I should have been stronger. Hercules snapped back before taking a deep breath. I should have been stronger, but in the end I was made a puppet. So, for my crime, I forced myself to forget her and my children's names. I don't deserve to even utter them. Percy watched, stunned, as one of the greatest heroes should him a side he doubted any ever knew existed. This was the man behind the legend, a man who had lost what he cared for most, but then where did the legend come from? I didn't look like Percy would have to wait long to find out. Anyways, Hercules said after a few minutes. After I met her, well, what can I say? She was perfect. Kind, gentle, understanding, patient, and most importantly, loving. Fiery too if you managed to get her upset enough, and let me tell you, that woman could throw a slap hard enough to even knock my thick skull. She was everything Garrick used to tell me about finding in a woman, and I was more than happy to settle down with her after a few years. Father visited again and was angry that I was wasting my potential though, saying that his son was above a mere mortal. That was the first and last argument I had with him. But a few years later the curse of that queen, Hercules said venomously, came, and you know what happened after. Percy remained silent for some time as he digested the story he'd just heard. So Hercules had not even been remotely close to what the myth said, or was it? He had to know, so he asked one question that concerned him. You do know that she can't cause madness, right? He asked in an even tone, not trying to anger the god and risking the chance of losing the knowledge that he wanted. Hercules scoffed before looking at him with a, "Are you serious?" face. Of course I know it wasn't just her. Her orders, sure, but we both know what disgrace of a god actually implemented the madness. If I could get my hands around that porker's neck, Hercules seethed while making strangling motions with his hands. So then, what happened with the labors? Percy asked after Hercules set his hands down. I mean, all the accounts I've heard go back and forth with you being arrogant, prideful, and a general ass. You go through having your family killed and being left alone to serve a punishment for a crime you didn't willingly commit without indulging in as many vices as possible to drown the misery, Hercules replied soberly. I sort of knew that it was the Olympians, not just the queen and the bastard drunk that did it. They watched on and did nothing, but in the end I couldn't really go against them, so instead I became like them. I flaunted my lineage, drank and claimed many women, and even cheated in some of the labors. I just wanted them done so that the Olympians would leave me alone. In Nightshade, Percy asked in an edgy voice. She had been so heartbroken thanks to Hercules and had her life ripped apart because of it. Depending on how Hercules answered, well, the Olympians might end up short a god. Nightshade, Hercules echoed as he furrowed his brows in thought. She was a Hesperides, correct? Percy nodded firmly, waiting for the explanation. Hercules sighed before speaking softly. I do feel guilty about that, but at the time, as I said, I just wanted to be done with it. I didn't think Atlas would have punished her so gravely, and when she ran to me, crying while begging for me to take her with me, I just couldn't. Percy noted the look in Hercules' eyes and recognized it instantly. It was a look he'd seen in the mirror so many times, especially when he knew a battle or dangerous quest was coming. You didn't leave her because she would slow you down, Percy murmured as he looked at Hercules. You left because you were scared that you would grow attached, and then fail to keep her safe. Hercules slumped as he nodded slowly. It sounds like you know the feeling. Swear to it, Percy suddenly said, making Hercules look at him strangely. Swear on the sticks and your immortality that everything you just told me is the whole truth, he continued gravely. Hercules looked at him unwaveringly for some time before answering. I swear on the sticks and my immortality that everything I have just told you is the truth and nothing but the truth. A loud thunder crack sealed the deal, and nothing happened to Hercules in the next 5 seconds. Percy let out a breath of relief he didn't know he was holding. Nyx was right, he really was different from the legends, Percy thought as he stood up and dusted off his leather pants. He then turned to face the god as he remained sitting. Well, a deal is a deal, Percy said before he pulled back his hood and revealed his face. Hercules narrowed his eyes at him for a moment before they shot wide as he gaped at him, making Percy. Yup. Percy Jackson, holder of too many titles to count or care, guy that helped bury your ass in fruit and whole hams after besting the senile water god you have living on the other side of the island with a daughter of the love goddess. How's it going? Hercules continued to gap at him for a few seconds before asking, how? They said you disappeared from the face of the earth after the war and no one could find you. Didn't look hard enough, Percy answered with a snort before digging into his pocket and then tossing Hercules an obsidian marble. Hercules looked at it curiously before Percy explained. You were treated unfairly and left here to rot after what the Olympians did. If you want your freedom and wish to join me, crush that marble and I'll come to break the seal on this island. You're going against Olympus? Hercules asked incredulously. But why? You're their hero. Percy gave him a smile devoid of warmth before replying, let's just say that they did something similar to me, and I refuse to continue on with their abuses. I won't ask you to fight for me if you do choose to be free, but please consider my offer. Also, I would ask you the favor of not revealing who I am, but that's up to you too. He was taking a gamble here, but Nyx had convinced him that the payoff was worth the risk. Getting the legendary Hercules to remain neutral would go a long ways to helping resolve this future war quickly, and if he actually joined to fight, all the better. Hell, Hercules had beef to pick with Dionysus, and Percy would gladly hand over the bastard to him. I'll be on my way then, Percy said as he raised his hood again while aiming one last glance at the silent god as he stared at the marble in his hand. He silently walked to the nearest shadow of a palm tree before dissolving into the darkness. His travel was short as he thought of his last destination for his little recruitment drive. Soon he materialized at the borders of a familiar river. The ghostly wails and screams of the damned echoed in the distance as a familiar chill permeated the air. Percy sighed as he looked at his uncle's domain before turning his attention to the river and walking forward until his toes barely scraped the black waters of the River of Hate. Percy took a deep breath as he chanted mentally, need to get her attention. Need to get her attention. With that he slowly started to walk into the hellish waters, his skin already tingling as the acidic liquid tried to eat away at him. He kept his face blank as he slowly walked, biting back the screams of pain that desperately wanted to come out. This hurts more than the first time. He complained as he moved through the waters till they were at his waist. He was starting to breathe harder and he knew that it was a matter of time before the water ate past his skin. He was focusing his raw power throughout his body to resist the effects of the river, but that was draining as well, and it did nothing for the pain. He was already starting to feel lightheaded and ready to step out, but then he heard an amused giggle come off his right side. His face turned, his flaming black eyes meeting a pair of swirling green and black streaks staring back at him. Lady Styx, he said with a small smile even as he contained his grimace from the pain. How lovely to see you. I was wondering, are you interested in an offer I have for you? DA. Chapter 23. A shocking revelation. Same time as Percy left to find Medusa. The hill was silent as a steady breeze rolled by, the tiny blades of grass dancing in unison to the light of the stars. The fields of Mars spread out within the valley, New Rome just over the hill itself. It was still the middle of the night and the stars were bright though shadows abounded as well. In this darkness the shadows writhed and condensed together to form a feminine figure. Soon the shadows and darkness dissipated to reveal Andromeda, her currently black eyes scanning around herself. Finding no one she released a tensed sigh, though her frame did lose some of the tension it held before. Okay, if I were a legendary demigod of the Big Seven prophecy, where would I go? She asked herself as she looked towards New Rome. I could probably find them wherever the strongest presence is, she mused as she started to walk towards the city. She walked silently, enjoying the cool night and fresh air. She glanced at the moon and frowned though, the bright satellite being a constant reminder of the goddess who'd lied to her for years. She sighed in sadness at the thought, wondering why things had to turn out like this. Even still she couldn't truly hate the goddess or her hunt, which was why she left all the planning on how to eliminate them to her brother and Rhea. They didn't have a problem with the task and honestly, Andy wished them a quick death, but knew that it wasn't likely. Still, that wasn't her purpose at the moment so she shocked the thoughts before she noticed she'd arrived at the city limit and a statue with no arms had just popped into existence in front of her. Halt! Terminus, god of borders and boundaries, shouted in Latin at her. State your business. Hello Lord Terminus, she greeted respectfully with a small bow and everything. I just wish to visit the city. Is that okay? The statue stared at her hard before asking, just who are you young demigod? I've never seen you before. I'm from the Greek camp and am just visiting the area, she replied without missing a step. I was enjoying the fields and wasn't really planning on visiting the city tonight but tomorrow. However, it just looks so beautiful at night that I couldn't resist. So can I go, please? She asked with full-blown puppy eyes and quivering lip. The statue grimaced slightly, obviously trying to resist her gaze but it was a losing battle and soon Terminus caved. Very well, he said stiffly. Any weapons to declare? No, I only have jewelry, she answered in a voice laced with powerful charm speak beyond the ability of any god or monster. Terminus couldn't so much as twitch an eyebrow as his facial features softened before he nodded. Enjoy New Rome, he said before the statue went completely stiff meaning that Terminus had moved his conscience to another one along the border. Andromeda had a very Percy-ish grin on her face as she continued to walk, already hearing the chatter of the lively city. Now to search. A raven-haired figure sat comfortably at a local cafe of New Rome, sipping on a steaming cup of black coffee, no sugar. He was dressed in a black bicker jacket over his equally black t-shirt with a skull on the front. His ripped jeans were more of the dark gray shade leading to thick, black boots with steel toes. His belt had a skull buckle matching the one on his right index finger, his usual Stygian iron blade left back at his room in the underworld due to laws of New Rome and bringing weapons. He was Nico D'Angelo, now a young man of 23 years. He'd filled out in the years, with a steady stream of training, hunting down rogue souls, and proper rest and nutrition thanks to one Dr. Solace. Now standing at nearly 6 foot and with a body of a triathlete, more defined and chiseled features, and of course the dark and mysterious air around him, he was quite the chick magnet. More's the pity he didn't bat that way. He sat alone for now, silently thinking on the last few years and how much things had changed ever since his cousin disappeared. A week after the 7 were given their rewards, Percy simply disappeared off the face of the earth. At first Nico had been a little worried but when he'd been informed of how Annabeth had not only cheated, but took godhood without pause without coming clean to his cousin, he thought that Percy had simply left to get some air. Alaska was beautiful the time of year anyways. However, after a year passed he got worried and noted his father was particularly distressed at the mention of the lost hero so Nico had pressed him for information and what he got shocked him. He knew he'd felt an odd pair of deaths that week but to get it straight from his father how the gods had murdered Percy's family, well, let's just say that there were several sorry undead that got to feel his wrath in the aftermath. After venting he made sure to visit Sally and Paul in Elysium, Hades escorted them himself, and tried to inform them of what happened. They weren't thrilled but he promised to keep them up to date of anything particularly important. Afterwards he'd almost charged straight into the hunt to recover Percy's sister but then thought better of it. He knew the Olympians were covering up what they did and a search had been issued for Percy. That alone would keep the hunt too mobile and alert for him to possibly sneak into their camp unnoticed. He also couldn't bring himself to tell Talia about what her mistress did. Where would Talia go if she left the hunt? Would Artemis even let her go if she knew that the secret could get out? Not likely, and Nico wouldn't have pushed it past the goddess to threaten to harm Percy's sister to keep them both quiet, so he decided that for now, he wouldn't act. What was he waiting for? A sign, possibly. Percy was too powerful for his death to not cause literal quakes through the underworld, so Nico was sure the cheeky bastard is alive somewhere. But does he know what the Olympians did? Probably. His disappearance was too convenient otherwise, Nico thought as he heard the bell for the door ring, signaling a new customer. He stood at 6'2" with a bright head of blonde hair and electric blue eyes. His strong jawline, lean and muscular build, and faintly tanned skin turned many a heads in the cafe. He was dressed in a buttoned version of the Camp Jupiter shirt, courtesy of Calypso's dress shop located in the city next to Leo's forge. His sleeves were rolled up, showing his branding of SPQR and over a decade's worth of bars for his services. Lastly were his clean blue jeans and tanned boots that had a heavy thud with his every step, marking the approach of Jason Grace, son of Jupiter, Experator, and one of the immortal partially guardians of New Rome. I know I love Will and all, but I got to admit, Jason's hot, Nico thought while appreciating the sight. After a year or so with his reward, Jason had returned to Olympus and asked if he and Piper could be allowed to grow until they reached 25, and many people liked the results. It was actually pretty funny when Nico and Jason did these hangouts, since they almost always got hit on together and then had to softly put down their admirers. Nico just did a sort of, not interested, glare, while Jason was just too damn nice and usually took forever to get his point across that he was taken. The rare few that replied with, "Doesn't matter, you look like you could use 2 girlfriends," always made Jason choke, while Nico actually laughed from time to time. Even the thought of it was making him smile faintly. "You're looking happy. Something nice happen?" Jason asked with a chuckle as he plopped down in the seat across from Nico. "Nah, just thinking of the girls that hit on you," Nico shot back and was satisfied to see Jason scratching his neck nervously. Giving him some mercy, Nico pushed on with the conversation. "So, back from another exciting job?" Jason sighed as he relaxed in his chair. "Yeah. 2 demigods this time, up in Oregon. Both around 12 years old and already running from a persistent pack of hellhounds. Got to them in time though, and I dropped them off yesterday at the barracks. Looks like a son of Mercury and I'm almost sure a daughter of Athena, but they'll have to wait for official claiming." "The work never ends," Nico muttered while taking a sip of his coffee and waving down a waitress. "Amen to that," Jason agreed as he looked through a small menu. "But hey, that's the job I picked, and honestly, makes me feel good to go out and save lives like that. If anything, I'm sure he would have joined me." At the mention of Percy, they got a little more sober, both missing the guy that was their brother in all but blood, especially Nico after he came to terms with his crush on Percy and how Percy was obviously in love with Annabeth, bitch. "I miss him, man," Jason said softly after a waitress came and took his order. "Most of us do," Nico agreed with a sigh. "We searched for years, but he just up and vanished." "Yeah, and remember about his family? Geez, do you think he even knew about them dying?" Jason asked as he looked at his own hands. "Even his little sister disappeared, she never got a chance." D.A. Chapter 24. A shocking revelation 2. "I miss him, man," Jason said softly after a waitress came and took his order. "Most of us do," Nico agreed with a sigh. "We searched for years, but he just up and vanished." "Yeah, and remember about his family? Geez, do you think he even knew about them dying?" Jason asked as he looked at his own hands. "Even his little sister disappeared, she never got a chance." At the mention of Percy's sister, Nico had to suppress a flinch as guilt welled up within him. Like Talia, none of the others had been told the truth of what happened for similar reasons. They could all be put in danger if they knew, and worse if they acted rashly about it. The group was already split up as it was, and that made them vulnerable. Nico had his duties in the underworld, Talia was surrounded by obedient hunters at Artemis' beck and call, Frank and Hazel had moved upstate to the border of Canada together, and Annabeth was mostly on Olympus, but then again, she would probably be part of the threat rather than be in danger. "I know it's hard, Jason," Nico said softly as he set his drink down. "But we will just have to carry on and hope that he returns someday." "But how can you be sure that he's even alive?" Jason asked dejectedly. Nico's only reply was a raised eyebrow, as if asking Jason if he was really asking him, a son of Hades, if he knew if someone was alive or not. Jason got the idea after a few seconds and the pair paused their conversation as the waitress arrived with Jason's drink, a loaded caramel macchiato with fudge and even a damn toasted marshmallow on top. Nico stared at the sugary bomb, not noticing the ding of the bell as another customer, a girl with raven hair reaching her lower back, walked into the store while aiming a subtle eye at them before taking a seat just far enough to not draw attention but close enough to eavesdrop. So, Jason started after taking a sip of his order, much to Nico's growing horror. Any news? Nico hummed as he tapped his chin. Not too much really. The hunt has been rather silent and barely seen nowadays. Barely seen? Jason asked incredulously. They haven't visited either camp in years or the 1 or 2 council meetings have attended to add suggestions for camp. Lady Artemis barely speaks at all and mostly looks at the floor. Something has to have happened with them. Yeah, some girl in massive wolf arrived, ripped Phoebe apart and kidnapped Percy's sister, Nico thought, recalling the Iris message he'd received days after it happened. Sure, Talia didn't know that Atalanta was in fact Andromeda Jackson, but he'd been one of the few that knew what happened since the Olympians, again, were hiding any signs of weakness. Their best equivalent to a special forces being so easily infiltrated, losing one of their best and oldest hunter, and it all happening without Artemis being able to do anything to stop it. That was a heavy blow to the entire pride of Olympus, and it scared them. Talia had told him that the hunt had been on a search for this, Umbra, and the girl accompanying him ever since in thirst of revenge, but every day without success Artemis gets more easily agitated and aggressive. They also hadn't had any new recruits since and their numbers had fallen by 5 so far. Who knows, you know how secretive the hunt can be, especially when concerning boys, Nico said with a shrug. Yeah I guess, Jason conceded while sipping at his drink. What else? Camp Halfblood is busy as ever. Overflowing with demigods but no additions to the big 3 as of yet. The cabins are being expanded into several floor buildings and many minor god cabins have been completed. Annabeth has been busy with helping the development and that gaudy statue as a monument was finished, Nico continued. Jason grimaced at the mention of the statue. He had been one of the people against erecting monuments for them. If anything, there should be something to represent all the lives lost in the wars, not just celebrating the 7, especially considering that the 7 had more than planned with Nico and Reina's involvement. Let's see, nah, that's all I got at the moment, Nico finished with a shrug. What about you? Where to begin? Jason replied while rolling a shoulder. Well, Frank and Hazel are doing well last time I visited. Takes guts what they're doing, Nico muttered, to which Jason nodded. You have to admit though, creating a safe house with small barrier and everything for demigods in need while being guarded by 2 experienced, powerful, partially immortal demigods is a great idea, Jason added with a faint smile. True, but they are a little out of the way, Nico pointed out. Maybe they'll move it to somewhere more central in a couple of years, Jason replied with a shrug. Maybe. Anyways, aside from them, Reina is doing fine as a senator for the Council of New Rome and trainer for demigod arrivals. I hear she's brutal though, Nico chuckled, to which Jason joined. No kidding. I'm pretty sure the new recruits are more scared of her than the monsters they're being trained to fight. They both started to outright laugh at that for a good 5 minutes before settling down. Nico looked at Jason's smiling face but quickly grew concerned when Jason slowly started to frown. Jason, what's wrong? Nico asked in a low tone. Jason sighed before answering, my father visited me again last week. Again? Nico asked with a quirked eyebrow. Yeah, well, Jason leaned forward so Nico mirrored him to hear better, he keeps offering godhood. Had it been anyone else they would have shouted something stupid like, godhood, no way. But this was Nico, so he kept his features schooled as he looked at Jason for further explanation. As you know, he wasn't exactly happy that I turned down the request. Stuff about I'm above such work and well, things are getting pretty rough between us lately. I almost lost it on him when he said that Percy didn't matter and that I was the real hero of Olympus and should be an Olympian. What happened then? Nico asked while mentally cursing Zeus further. He stormed off and that was a week ago, Jason replied while taking a larger gulp of his sugary tragedy. Was all Nico could say as he thought about the prideful bastard that is the king of the gods. Honestly, after what he learned about them, the only goddess he even acknowledged was Hestia and his father. All the other ones could go swim in the bowels of Tartarus for all he cared. And Piper? He asked after a pause and grew even more worried when Jason frowned again. We've been, okay, Jason answered unsurely. Things have been a little tense too. I mean, I get a mission once every month at least and am gone anywhere from a few days to a whole week. I guess she's just getting bored being cooped up, but I've suggested she go more often into the camp. Train or help with the new recruits, but she doesn't really seem too interested in it. Odd considering she picked the job with you, it was a mutual choice, right? Nico asked after uncertainty flashed through Jason's eyes. Well, she asked me what I wanted to do after the war a few days before we got to Athens, and I told her about my goal to keep helping demigods. I got a little too into it, and then Piper just said it was nice but didn't tell me hers. Then on Olympus I looked at her and thought she would want it too. That's why I asked for both of us to get partial immortality, so we wouldn't be restricted by the ancient laws, Jason explained. But why are things tense then? Nico asked. Jason ran a hand through his hair before answering, well, I think it might have to do with the war being over. You have to remember, Piper was thrown into our world in the middle of war and stepped up to the role she needed to play, but even before all of it, she just wanted a quiet life. I guess that after the war ended, she was expecting more peace and quiet, but then I got us this job that's constantly keeping me busy. She's complained about it a lot and how I'm hardly home. Damn, Nico sighed as he looked at Jason critically. Well, do you at least keep her satisfied when you are around? I know that helps with busy couples. DA, Chapter 25, A Shocking Revelation 3. I guess that after the war ended, she was expecting more peace and quiet, but then I got us this job that's constantly keeping me busy. She's complained about it a lot and how I'm hardly home. Damn, Nico sighed as he looked at Jason critically. Well, do you at least keep her satisfied when you are around? I know that helps with busy couples. At his suggestion, Jason blushed crimson while looking down at the table and not meeting Nico's eyes. Wait, you guys have progressed, right? It's been years and you have your own house, Nico said in a mix of shock and disbelief. I'm old-fashioned, damn it. Jason snapped back with a deepening blush. Holy shit, the Grace siblings plus one are still virgins, Nico murmured as he stared wide-eyed at his friend. And I always thought I'd be the last. Dude, Jason said while raising his hands in a surrendering gesture. Look, I just want to make sure of everything and maybe propose when the time is right. Nico completed for him, to which Jason nodded. Then what's stopping you? We're at a time of peace, monster attacks are in a steady low, demigod numbers are high and the camp defenses are strong. If there was a time, it's now. It's just, I don't know, something feels off, Jason said while taking a small sip of his drink. What do you mean? Nico asked with narrowing eyes. I don't know how to say it, but I feel like the Olympians will get in the way, Jason said in a low tone. Father tried to make that one of his selling points on how I was worthy of a goddess, not a mere child of Aphrodite. I'm pretty sure Aphrodite would approve and all, but then again, lately she's been having bonding night outs with Piper, especially after we have arguments. Pipes is gone for a night or two and then seems happier than usual but doesn't really tell me what she does and I find it a little worrying. Dude, you aren't suggesting. I don't know what to think, Jason cut him off shortly. But if anything I should trust her and be thankful that Aphrodite is helping her out. Okay, I won't push on anything, but hey, if you ever need to talk, I am away, or if I happen to be on the surface you can just use your flashy transportation, Nico said while finishing with a snicker. Hey, don't diss the lightning teleportation man. It's cooler than shadow traveling, Jason replied with a smirk. Whatever you say, Nico replied with a shrug. At least it didn't take me years to figure out my shadow traveling. How long was it before you figure out how to travel by lightning again? Well, I didn't wind up halfway to China when I messed up, Jason countered before downing the rest of his drink. So, want to head back to my place and throw back some cold ones? You want beer after drinking that? Nico asked incredulously while pointing an accusing finger at Jason's empty cup. Sure, Jason said with a shrug. Pipes wasn't home when I arrived last night and I always enjoy good company, so what do you say? Nico thought about it for a few moments before sighing in defeat and nodding. He finished his coffee quickly, went up to the counter to pay for their drinks, and then the pair headed out, not noticing their little shadow trailing them. They walked in comfortable silence, enjoying the sights of the city around them as they headed for the newest district added to New Rome. It was specifically commissioned after the council was informed that Jason and Piper had taken a role as guardians of the camp along with Frank and Hazel at the time. Calypso and Leo joined a year or two later, forming the Guardian District. Essentially as was a way for the council to brown-nose them into favor with an upper-class style lodgings. Reina and Nico were each built a home as well in honor of their efforts, but truly, out of all the heroes of the giant war, only Jason, Piper and Reina lived here. Nico was mostly in the underworld or with Will in their apartment in New York, Frank and Hazel have their house up north, and Calypso and Leo usually prefer to flash to a custom-built house on Ogygia. The houses were nice though, being built into large villas with large spans of land and even some trees around them. Jason even had a reception hall and office added to his and Piper's just in case a senator or Legion member needed to have an emergency meeting with him. Don't you ever find it creepy that this place is almost always deserted? Nico asked. I don't want to hear that from the guy who prefers staying in the place where screams of torture are the background, Jason replied with a deadpan as Jason's house came into view, and the living room light was on. Huh, Pipes must be home then. The pair continued to walk on up the small path to the front door and Nico noticed that it was slightly ajar, making him frown in thought. As they stepped closer, Nico caught the sound of heavy breathing and the occasional grunt, making him frown further. A glance at Jason showed him that the son of Jupiter gone rather pale as his hands balled into fists. Nico started dreading what they would find, but they couldn't stop themselves as they arrived at the door and soundlessly pushed it open to a startling sight. There, just a mere few meters in front of them on a couch, was Piper and some blonde dude fucking like rabbits. Piper was on her back, legs spread, as her tongue hung loose and her eyes remained glazed with lust as she looked at the man mercilessly pounding into her. Her hair was disheveled and Nico caught the trace scent of alcohol in the air along with heavy perfume. The man over her was rather handsome, with a lean yet heavily muscled back, tan complexion, short-cut hair, and deep blue eyes. Nico and Jason stood stock still at the sight, neither really being able to think a coherent thought as they watched on while the man continued on without a care in the world. However, after a while Piper's face turned their way as a breeze rolled in, and her eyes widened in surprise. Jason! She shouted in shock before she looked at the man on top of her in horror. Oh my gods! Suddenly the man stopped as he turned his torso to look at them smugly. See little bro, once a daughter of Aphrodite, always a daughter of Aphrodite, the man said as his facial features changed to more clear-cut, his blonde hair growing until it reached his cheeks, giving him a surfer look. Apollo! Piper shouted in shock as she used one hand to cover her bare breasts while scooting away from him, tears starting to trail down her eyes. How? Why? Oh, don't play innocent, sweetheart. I only put the moves. You did everything else. Apollo chuckled back as he snapped his finger and was immediately dressed in jeans and a white buttoned shirt while walking towards the still silent Jason. Pops told you, you were above her and now you have the proof. Jason, don't listen to him. Piper shouted as she grabbed a shirt from the floor and put it on to cover herself. So come on bro, Apollo continued while resting a hand on Jason's shoulders. Let's head on up to Olympus and talk it up with Dad, he added with an unashamed grin. Artemis was right about you, Jason finally said in a broken voice as his head remained turned down. You really are a pig-headed bastard. Apollo's grin fell at the words, his face becoming serious as he spoke in a grave voice, Father can only take a no so many times, bro. Jason's hands shot up and grabbed Apollo by the collar of his shirt, his head finally rising to reveal the tears running down his cheeks. You're not my brother. He shouted as lightning started to crackle off his body to the point Nico had to take a step back. And I'm going to make you pay.